Thank you so much for clicking on this video. As you can see, I'm currently in the middle of editing it, but I just wanted to jump in here first to talk about some things that I've been seeing in regards to discussions of this book online since after I finished filming the initial video. And I'm going to read what I have written here because I want to be clear and concise, and I've spent way too long editing and I kind of just want to be done and my eyes hurt so much, but here we go. It goes without saying that POC authors in the fantasy genre or any other should not be held at a higher set of standards than their white counterparts. POC authors have a right to explore difficult themes regarding their culture and colonization, and they should not be harassed online for whatever they choose to explore. And as a POC reader, I want to figure out what the exploration is, and if it's been achieved within the scope of my own opinion and perspective. As I say in this video, my review of this book is intended for readers, and is solely based on the text alone, which includes the author's note. I know I can come off as intense in some parts of this video, but I'm just incredibly passionate about fantasy books, fantasy world building, history and mythology, all that good stuff. It also goes without saying that it's not a bad thing to draw inspiration from history and mythology, because I feel like I can coming off that way later in the video, especially when it comes to one's own culture. I would be a hypocrite if I actually said that. We'd lose the entire genre. I want to start with some positive things to say about this book that I bring up more towards the end of the video, but I'll bring them up here now as well. When it comes to scenes of high intensity, such as the action scenes or scenes depicting characters going through hardships, I felt like I was on the edge of my seat, and my heart was affected by what was on the page. I understood that the scenes depicting drug addiction felt true to life, and how affecting it can be for family members to deal with. And when I read other characters' views opposing the main character, I felt the anger with them and empathized with their frustrations. My main points of contention are mainly in the world building and writing style, and less so with the romance elephant in the room. My subjective opinion is that some of the mythical inspired elements are changed in a way that neither fits well with the original mythology or with this fictional world. Historical elements are taken from various disparate points in time and don't mesh well together, in my opinion. Every small change ends up leading to bigger implications that don't fit well with everything else we learn. While the writing shines with its use of metaphors and description, the balance is tipped a little too far in that direction and ends up taking quite a lot of page time, in my opinion. If you're here just for my answer to the question, is this a colonizer romance? I'll tell you here, I don't know. I'm really on the fence of it. Only with the full series can readers come to their definite answer. Yes, this is a debut book and the first in a planned trilogy, and I know wholeheartedly how much a story can change as the series progresses, and my opinion is welcome to and subject to change. Leave a comment down below if you understand what I'm trying to do. I went into this text with the goal of trying to understand it at its level, and everything I say with all my heart is in the goodest of faiths. At the end of the day, I'm glad that the list of Chinese and Asian fantasy books are growing more and more and reaching more readers. I do realize now that I forgot May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This timing was very not intentional in any way. I just have time blindness. As it is well within my right as a reader and as a reader of Chinese descent to express my opinion, it is also well within your right as a reader to agree or disagree with my review. My opinion is my own. And if you read the book and liked it, that's great. If you want or don't want to watch this video, that's all good. I've honestly been working on this too long to not post it. I'm tired and I want to move on. Consider this the spoiler-free section. There will be spoilers onwards, and a list of trigger and content warnings are in the description below. Anyway, with all those disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Grace Has Officially Lost Their Mind today. Well, as you know by the title of this video, I have read To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang. I mentioned this book before back in my 2024 anticipated reads video, mainly because of the drama surrounding Kate Corain. When it finally came out recently, I heard all sorts of stirrings of people calling it a colonizer romance. And that really intrigued me. I wanted to know what was really going on. So I decided to pick up the book myself and see what it's up. I did not read any other reviews going into reading this book, like other than colonizer romance. I was like, you know what? Don't tell me more. I'm gonna go into this with as much of an open mind as possible, with as little pre-reading bias at all. It has now resulted in a week of insanity, a 12-page plot summary, at least 13 pages of various other notes, and a rough script that is about 22 pages long, which I have on my phone here. My brain hurts, but now that I've finally come to the recording of this review, you will find out as I go along why the romance is the least of my problems regarding this book. So let's just jump right in. My library got me a copy really fast. So I want to start with the beginning of this book, obviously. However, the beginning of this book starts with an author's note. Now, the thing is that as a reviewer, I am not really the kind of reviewer who wants to bring up anything about the author directly. And this is a good place to say that this review is made with like the goodest of faiths. I do not want to get to any of the author drama right now, but this review is mainly for readers, made completely in my own opinion. Please do not harass the author. Please do not go to the author on any social media. If you are the author or friends or family of the author, and please, I don't think this video is for you. But I'm going completely based on what is in this book alone, with some friends' third-party hearings and some things that I did end up reading as I was making this review. So to start with, what begins in To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods is not chapter 1, but it's the author's note. And the author's note talks about how she grew up in northern China in Manchuria and how she learned about the Japanese occupation during World War II, as well as the atrocities of Unit 731. This is literally on the first page. I'm not kidding. For those of you who don't know, Unit 731 was an Imperial Japanese biochemical weapons research unit conducting human experimentation on prisoners from all various parts, definitely China, also Russian. Turns out there were some American POW captives there as well. And when Japan finally surrendered to the US at the end of World War II, they burned everything down. And unfortunately, a lot of the perpetrators of this war crime got away with it. So I'm reading the first page and I have very specific and horrible images in my head now, and I don't want to continue. If you do want to do any research on Unit 731, it's like really any horrible thing you can think of, they probably did it. Please go into it with a strong stomach. But okay, so this is her home. This is where she grew up, and her grandfather is telling her about this, and like, of course, this must be very important to her family. So she goes on to describe that basically this book is a what-if story inspired by this and China's century of humiliation, which is a real term used to describe China's history and all of like the terrible, horrible, has it been a few minutes yet? Incredibly shitty things that happened. It starts roughly from around the first Opium War when British opium was coming into China, and goes on until the establishment of the People's Republic of China after World War II. So that's roughly about 100 years. And so this is a what if story. Like, what if we had magic to fight up against the colonists' advanced weapons that they used to subjugate us and beat us? And I thought, well, okay, that's a nice premise. This clearly means a lot to her. I really didn't want to hear about Unit 731 in my fantasy book. If she had not mentioned it, I think I would be slightly more peaceful than I am now. And if she still had to go through with its inspirations, then I'd rather just have figured it out myself. Or maybe I'll just be like, hey, well, that's a thing, and then not have figured it out, and again, be more peaceful. I don't want to continue, but for the sake of my curiosity in finding out what kind of romance book this is, I guess I'll keep going. I'm just really caught up in the author's note, and it's been 10 minutes of recording, and I'm not even starting with the actual story, but alas. So let's actually get started with the story, and we begin. I'm doing the thing where I put the pictures up on the board, except I'm using a cork board because I don't want to use tape. Okay, so let's actually begin with the story. So we take place in the world of Pangu, which is fantasy China. Oh darn, it doesn't show up very well, but we'll roll with it. I'm already here, so let's keep going. So, pointy thing. So right now we are in fantasy China, and in fantasy China there are 5 great empires. And the empire that we're in is called Arlang, as well as the empire of Sihai. And these other 3 empires that I just put onto one page because they don't really matter. So we have Jiang, Lei Zhen, and Nejia. I hope this corkboard doesn't fall because it's propped up by books. So I want to also say that this book has no map, and that's great for some readers. Some readers don't like a map. I would have preferred a map, so I drew one, and this is totally not accurate. This is not a canonized map, but I drew one anyway because it feels important, because I can't even describe how fantasy China is. Right now, if you are a Chinese reader and or a Chinese knowledgeable reader, some of these names might have piqued your ears, so to speak, because this world building borrows heavily from real Chinese mythology and history, as well as other various parts of history, and Rome comes up later. So all of these names come from Chinese mythology. So you have Pangu. Pangu is the name of the world. Pangu is a real Chinese creation figure, the giant who created the world, who fashioned the earth, and then his body created like mountains and rivers and stuff. And then we have Erlang, who is a Chinese god with a third eye. Lei Zhen, which might be Lei Zhen, a thunder god. And we have Nejia, who is a pretty prominent figure, not just in Chinese mythology, but also in Hindu mythology as well. And we have Jiang, which in my research, nothing really came up for Jiang's like specifically, but I think it might be related to the mythical Yan emperor, except for Sihai, which just means four seas. 20 years ago, a interdimensional portal opened up in the sky, and in came the Roman Empire. And I just want to also pause again right here, because the Roman Empire is a capital E empire, and all these empires are also capital E empires. The capitalization is so weird and confusing, like makes it so confusing, because if we have capital E empires, then I don't catch right away which capital E empire they're talking about. Then they're talking about capital E emperors, and unless they use a specific name or title, then I'm always thinking about like, okay, which capital E emperor? Because I'm always wanting to think about the Roman emperor, but then these guys are emperors, and then there's also the previous emperor and the current emperor anyway. So like that's just so confusing. I don't understand, like, to differentiate them more, why these couldn't have been 5 kingdoms versus 1 empire. But again, you'll see more as we go along how fantasy Pangu is borrowing very heavily from Chinese history and mythology. So that's probably why they couldn't just come up with capital K kingdoms, because we're doing Chinese imperial history. Anyway, this is so crazy. I don't want to go too deep into like the definition of an empire, because then if all 5 of these are empires, then like we do get a brief mention of like little dynasties. So like there's probably a couple of sovereign nations within every empire, but like that's too many empires. We already have 6 empires, and this book is like 350 pages long. Okay, back to this. So Rome here, my pointy thing, Rome here is not the swords and sandals Rome that we know and love, I guess. No, so they've opened up an interdimensional portal in the sky to connect to Pangu, and they have advanced science and technology, which include, but are not limited to, guns, planes, missiles, fighter jets, chemistry, electricity, touchscreen tablets, bulletproof glass, Romeo and Juliet, no, I'm not kidding, remote control, magic restricting, electroshock bracelets, and 3-piece suits. Like, when I was first like hearing about this book and thinking about the blurb and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, like a cool kind of sci-fi Rome, like Roman pillars in the shape of like mecha golems or something like that. Like the guns and planes didn't throw me off. What threw me off first was the 3-piece suits. So then I'm thinking like, who are these Godfather cosplayers doing in a Blade Runner AU, doing a Gintama with a coming aliens? They're technically aliens, with a Gintama doing a thing coming from the sky into fantasy Asian country here. Even though in chapter 1 we see Ru Ying, I really got to do the world building first. The Pangu people are like, oh my god, wow, like Romans. And then, hey, you have technology, we have magic, like, hey, let's be buddies. Until the Roman Empire ignited a war that decimated Arlang in particular after 1 day of fighting. And so because of that, everyone's like, oh my god, everyone's intimidated. So Pangu, all 5 emperors of Pangu sign a treaty with Rome that has very very unequal terms. Nobody really knows what the exact terms are, because this is a thing that will come up later. And so poor Arlang, where the main story takes place and where we meet the main characters, like they've lost lands, their people are displaced, and their Princess Hele, who I don't think is a real Chinese figure because I tried to look her up. The way it's spelled makes me think of Helen, like Helen of Troy. So their Princess Hele is taken as leverage as a royal hostage. So now the Romans are big bad colonizers, tyrants. In the first chapter, the main character describes how she saw the crown prince like shoot a man execution style because he dared to put his hands on the prince's clothes while begging for money. Like, oh, they're lording themselves over us like gods. And again, the capitalization issue is that gods are capitalized all the time. So like, oh, they're lording over us like gods, and like talking about the real gods are both capitalized. So like metaphorical gods and real gods are capitalized. So again, it's just so confusing. So now talking about a little bit about Pangu, so their magic. The thing is that even though they have magic and they've been a magical society, I'm going to talk way more about the magic system later. They've been a magical society since like forever, but they lost the war because their number of magic users called xianglings have been decreasing in number even before the Romans' arrival. So they've kind of been at a disadvantage. Not everyone is born a xiangling, okay? I'm sorry, I should have like made this all different colors. I'll try and find a way to make it show up better in the edit, but I'll keep pointing at it. Xianglings have been decreasing in number over the years, so that's like people say like, oh, like that's the reason why, like one of the factors why they lost the war. Even so, like they've had the Wukai temples. Wukai means 5 colors, or Wucai. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is not always the best. And these temples or monasteries, they kind of interchange them. And the thing about these temples is that this is where where xianglings go to learn about magic. But the Romans, when they beat Pangu in their single day, they took the temples, and now nobody goes there anymore, and the monks who used to teach the xianglings magic are gone. Finally, we begin with the plot. And I'm gonna remove these 3 empires because they don't really matter. They're kind of taking up more space than I thought. Finally, we begin with the main character, whose name is Yang Ruying. She is 19 years old and she lives in the capital city of Arlang called Jing City. And Jing City has been split in half by a capital F fence, which is less intimidating than a capital W wall, but okay. And so the Romans don't want any Pangu people on their side of the wall, but they come onto the Pangu side of the wall fence, and they're just terrorizing everybody, and they can get away with shit because like the emperors are so, like the Arlang emperors, like no one wants to incite a war, so the Romans just like do whatever they want. And she is so mad. She's like, these freaking Romans, like they've come and taken our land, they've terrorized everyone, like their prince is so evil, like he like killed that father who just wanted to buy food for his son. So when we open with it, like she has some justifiable anger, but she's like reading it goes into like such info dumpy exposition, very girl boss type of attitude, like, oh, these men, like they think they can do whatever they want to us. Like the writing just doesn't work because like I'm like, okay, like she's just walking, but she's info dumping exposition and history and like the things that she saw, but she's just walking. So I'm a little bit like, oh boy, this is that type of book. All right, where she's going to, she's gonna buy opium. I mean opium, because for some reason there's also an opium allegory in here, and it's called opium, but I'm just gonna call it opium because that's just where my muscle memory is going. So I'm gonna put the opium because it is a Roman pushed product. Oh boy, we got Romans and British all in one beautiful, stupid package. Okay, so she's buying opium because her twin sister Maya is addicted to opium. So the reason why Ruying is buying opium from Maya is because Maya is taking it because she believes it will enhance her gift. They're both xianglings. So xianglings, their abilities are called gifts, and she believes it will enhance her gift. Ruying wants to wean her off of it because it killed their father, who went through these severe withdrawal symptoms, and it eventually killed him. So she's like, okay, look, I have to keep buying opium because my sister is addicted to it, so I'm trying to wean her off it, but we need more opium to wean her off of it. So anyway, so just know that Ru Ying's father was abusive to both of them while he was high on drugs, unfortunately, as it happens. And they talked about how they protected each other when he was beating them, and it's like actually really really sad to read. And how their grandma, their nai protected them as well, and it was their grandmother who hid all of their last valuable possessions because he was selling them to buy more opium, but they were running out of food. They were also afraid that he was gonna sell the girls to brothels to get more money to buy more opium. And it's like actually really sad to read because when the opium crisis really was happening in China, like people would and even in real life, they would destroy their livelihoods and their families to buy more drugs. Because he had no more money to buy opium, he eventually died from severe withdrawal. And this comes up a little bit every once in a while when Ru Ying is feeling particularly sad about it. But she's on her way to buy opium from her childhood friend turned traitor Bai Hu, I think. It's White Tiger. And again, this is we're still in the first 3 chapters. The first 3 chapters have a lot of exposition dump. While Bai Hu is talking to Ru Ying, we also learn a little bit more about Ru Ying's backstory, that her grandma, her nai was a gifted strategist, but her grandfather, her husband was took all her credit because he used to be a general, so they were once a noble family, but he took all her credit and was always cheating on her behind her back. So we get a taste of, again, how much Ru Ying hates the patriarchy here. And I'm still gonna keep going with more exposition because this is just how it is now. Ru Ying, she has a gift. She is a xiangling, and her gift, her ability, is being blessed by death. And so her main ability, per the blurb, she has a death touch that doesn't require skin contact to activate. There is no condition in which it activates automatically without her control. I'm being very specific here because I believe when you're coming in with a magic system, you gotta establish some rules here. So how she does it is that she absorbs their qi, and as she's absorbing their qi, they get weaker and weaker until she completely snaps the connection between their soul and their body, and they die. So she has a couple of sub abilities as well, which include enhanced senses. She has this aura soul vision that so as people are dying, or if she concentrates really hard, she can see people's different colored souls, so auras kind of, and everyone has a unique color, and she can sense them within her surroundings. So she even tell the number of people through a wall, and she can feel people's emotions as they die. It's kind of a little bit funny because the way capital D, death, is described is sort of like a character on its own, sort of works as a shoulder devil or a spidey sense kind of deal. I don't really feel like it's consistent because even when she's not talking about her gift, capital D, death, is always capital D, death. Either death is her shoulder devil that wants her to go apeshit, but it's also her spidey sense who warns her whenever there's danger. That happened once. I'm not really sure if her gift of capital D, death, is a god that's directly trying to help her out. I'm not really sure. Again, she's I could just kill these Romans with a snap of my finger. But her grandma, she's Ru Ying, when you use magic, it comes at the cost of your own qi, it comes at the cost of your own life force, don't use it. So her grandmother has a point, because all xianglings use their magic, it comes at the cost of their own life force. Okay, so we've barely gotten into the plot here, and it's been a half hour of recording. Ru Ying goes to Bai Hu to buy opium. Bai Hu is her childhood friend turned traitor who's completely assimilated with the Romans. He is also the illegitimate son of the brother of the former Arlong emperor. So he is cousins with the current Arlong emperor, Yongle, who is also, again, a real Chinese emperor, by the way, but he doesn't really show up, so he's not that important. He hates the royals. He's like, my dad was an asshole. He abused and neglected me and my mom. Like, why did my royal relatives get their birthrights? Like, they were just born into it. Ru Ying is like, yeah, no, I get where you're coming from, but like, she's still kind of mad that he's assimilated with the Romans because he sells opium. And she's like, yeah, opium is like freaking ruining our neighborhood. And she's like, you're not the boy I used to know in childhood. Like, I used to have a crush on you, man. And he's like saying, look, like, Arlong is like, used to be like the wealthiest empire, and they used to bully all the other empires, and like, we've been ravaged with natural disasters, and like, you know, we're not so great either. So like, if we go to war with Rome, then I want to be on the winning side. And so he makes Ru Ying an offer. So in exchange for protection for you and your family, can you use your death gift on the current Arlong emperor, his own cousin? And she's like, no, if I kill a member of the royal family, that's a curse on my bloodline. And like, you know, like, maybe the current Arlong emperor will fight back against the Romans? Because she's like, oh, if I kill the current Arlong emperor, then Baihu, even though he's illegitimate, he can make a claim for the throne with Rome's backing, and he will just become Rome's puppet. And she is afraid of war breaking out because she's afraid innocent people will die, and she's also afraid that, like, even though there are laws protecting Xianglings, she's still afraid that, like, if she is called upon to use her magic to fight in the war, she's gonna die for the losing side, which is fair. So before they go, Baihu asks like, hey, Ru Ying, I heard your grandma is interviewing marriage suitors for you. Like, is that what you want? Okay, sorry, I had to change my battery. Okay, and she says, and I quote, do I want to shackle myself to the will of a man and forever bow to his orders? I nearly laughed. My mother died giving life to me and my sister because that's what women are expected to do. Grandma is the smartest strategist of her generation, the reason behind my grandfather's military success, and nobody knows her name. Grandpa got all the recognition she isn't allowed to have, the praise and applause and admiration from the wide-eyed girls whom he bedded behind her back, despite all that she did for him. No, I don't want to marry, but my family needs protection. Rome grows greedier by the day, and as like you say, the emperor's advisors are pushing for him to retaliate and to fight. The Phantom gains more rebel supporters with every one of Rome's transgressions. Too many people have lost too much to Rome, to opium, and to our emperor's cowardliness. Every day, new players materialize in this game of power. Grandma fears war is closer than we realize. I don't blame her. That's giant, I don't want to marry and shackle myself to a man speech. And okay, so real quick, she does mention this guy named the Phantom. He doesn't actually show up in this book, but I wanted to make this joke. He doesn't. And he is an anti-Rome, anti-royalist Pangu rebel leader. You know what? I'm going to put him up. Why not? I'm trying not to read a whole lot of quotes because that takes up a lot of time. But no, this is kind of fairly common-ish where like there's either a huge chunk of dialogue or there's a huge chunk of exposition and inner thoughts and history, info dumping, all sorts of stuff between two lines of dialogue. In chapter 3, I once measured that between two lines of dialogue was like 2 pages of like inner thoughts and feelings. So when I come back to the dialogue, I'm like, so wait, what were you talking about? Because I was just interrupted by this girl's beautifully super helpful info dumpy backstory. But now we move on. After she gets her opium drug from Baihu, she's out to go back home. And on the way home, she sees a Roman boy giving money to a girl begging on the street because her mother had just died from opium. Wow, how helpful. A Roman boy giving money to the problem he caused. And she does, of course, she doesn't know, but we know it is the, I'm so sorry, Damiano from Måneskin. He is the second prince of Rome, Antony. Officially, this is where my headache gets bad to worse, because this girl describes him not just from this beginning part alone, but she describes him as handsome so many times with his jade green eyes. So this is what she says when she first sees Antony. Skin pale and hair dark with soft curls cropped short against his face. Even from a distance I could tell he was handsome, though not in the way Pangu was used to. Strong nose, pillowed lips, arched brows, and rounded eyes, his features were as sharp as the chiseled statue Rome gifted to the late emperor when they first arrived, displayed in the square near the palace. Caesar Augustus, one of Rome's legendary rulers from thousands of years ago, their first emperor. Yeah, Caesar Augustus is in this, everybody. So confirmed, Roman Empire. Okay, and like also, I'm not really sure if maybe this is actually our world, but in like an alternate universe. What if the Augustus dynasty and the Roman Empire lasted up until modern, advanced technology? So I don't know. So she sees him giving money to a beggar girl. Is this supposed to be his save the cat moment? Because she's talking about how kind this is, how kind he is to give like 1 gold coin to this beggar girl who's trying to bury her mom. And I'm like, are we seeing the same thing here? Like, she is such a girl boss who like is so swayed by the one gesture of kindness she's ever seen this Roman guy do. So she takes this as an opportunity to steal his wallet, and she is unfortunately caught by his guards, but she's like, oh, like I gotta use my death magic now. So she pulls on the tea of the guards, and she's pulling and pulling, and he's like, no, mercy, please. And she's like, she stops just before killing him, and she's like thinking about how her grandma urged her to show mercy. And so really all that talk of wanting to go apeshit on the Romans is just talk. And I understand that she wants to respect her grandma. If this were like a real inner turmoil that Ru Ying goes through, because like I completely understand the inner conflict of women, especially in modern society, who are like so angry inside, angry at the world, angry at like the unfair playing field that they have to navigate in like work and life and society. If Ru Ying is dealing with this same inner conflict, I wish it was better explored deeper, just because the way that it's written here and throughout the book, her anger and her hesitation to kill is like presented at odds with each other, or just kind of like flips around like a light switch. Like I don't really understand. I can understand she like talks about how like she's really angry on the inside, angry at the world and how unfair it is, and she like wants to use like the death magic to like stop the Roman invaders and help her people, but the survival instincts that she's taught by her grandma like take over as well. Like her, like she hears like the teachings of her grandma's like, no, Ru Ying, you have to show mercy. Every time you use this magic, it takes years off your life, and like killing someone weighs heavily on the human soul. So like if this were a like true inner conflict, then like I wish it was explored better. Anyway, so she stops her magic just before killing this guy, but she sees that this Roman guy is like looking at her with admiration and wonder, and he like wants to talk to her, but she runs away. And we see Tao Hua, her childhood friend. And Tao Hua has the gift of superhuman strength, and she is the daughter of a general, and she catches Ru Ying in the nick of time, and they book it out of there. And so Tao Hua has been away in the army with her dad on behalf of the Arlong Emperor, who's trying to quell all rebellions that are happening like out in the countryside because of the Phantom, to prevent war, like period. Like even though these are like anti-Rome rebels, they don't want any risk of war happening with Rome. So Ru Ying is like kind of at odds with Tao Hua's role in the army, quelling the rebellion. But Tao Hua makes it implicitly clear that she is on the Phantom side and wants to also stop Rome at any costs. And she warns Ru Ying that there have been increasing reports of missing xianglings and bodies drained of blood, so she urges her to be careful. Finally, after 6 chapters, we actually meet Meiya. She was only talked about for 5 chapters up until this point. So as I'm reading the 5 chapters, she talks like so much about her grandma and so much about Meiya, and I'm like, are we gonna see them soon? And when Ru Ying comes home, she finds the place trashed. Unfortunately, it's because Meiya's recovery progress has slipped. She's found Ru Ying's secret stash, and it is again like talking about dealing with family members who are struggling with addiction. These like images and like things that happen are like true to life and really hard to deal with. So Meiya is like, I'm taking this opium because it'll make me stronger, because Meiya has a healing gift. So opposite of Ru Ying, they're twin sisters, Meiya has a healing gift, and she's like, I'm gonna join the Phantom, I'm gonna stop Rome, and like taking opium will like make me stronger. But she's like, no, that's just a lie pushed by Rome and the Phantom. I don't want you to die a martyr. This is like a fool's errand. And so they're mad at each other, and Meiya storms off. So later after the fight, Ru Ying is sitting with Nai Nai. She is led letting her Nai interview marriage candidates for her. I mean, like, it's fair, like, you know, like, you're a girl boss who doesn't want to be opposed by the patriarchy, but like during times of war, like people want to have security and they still have like a noble name, and if she gets married, it can provide a level of safety for them. So she's like, okay, like my Nai is finding marriage prospects for me. Her Nai is now traveling to find more marriage interviews for her. But yeah, so her Nai is leaving for a while, and so like Ru Ying is like, you know, if maybe we'll go north, and maybe that'll be nice, like, because my great-great-grandfather is from the north, and hopefully if I go north and like am away from all this, like we can live safely and like the land will protect us. And again, like going back to the author's note, the author was born in Manchuria, so yeah, like northern China is important to her. However, trouble comes knocking on Ru Ying's door when their entire neighborhood is raided by Romans who are using sleep gas and guns to raid people's houses. It's actually really harrowing. So Ru Ying is like, oh my god, so she tries to get Meiya out, but Meiya is sick, so she isn't able to get her out, so she tries to stand firm when the Romans like come into their house, and she's trying to like use her death magic, but because she's unpracticed and because she only wants to subdue, not kill, she is unfortunately captured and taken away. End of part 1. So now, since we are at the end of part 1, I want to take a moment to talk about some of the things that we've explored so far. So again, as I mentioned before, I'm not really sure what Ru Ying's true motivation really is here, because she's either a girl boss or a girl defeatist. She's either really angry at the Romans for invading and like the people deserve to have their land back, and like why aren't the emperors doing anything, and like I can stop these Romans with my death magic, or she's a girl defeatist and she's like, no, like the Romans they have such advanced technology, and like I don't know how to use my magic properly, and like her grandfather died in the one day war against them. Like we're not going to be able to do this. We just need to survive however we can. And again, like if this conflict were explored deeper, such as like she's trying to figure out a way how she can do both or reconcile with both, or like, you know, figure it out, because like it is a conflicting nature of like, I think especially women in like today's society, where like they're really angry but they want to be safe, but like they're so angry at the unfair world. And like if this were like more properly explored deeper, I would totally understand where Ru Ying was coming from. But like the way that it's described in the book, it feels like one chapter she's a girl boss, and then she's a girl defeatist in the next chapter, and she doesn't really explore why like these different things anyway. So, and because using death magic and being capable of killing someone with like magic without even touching them is like such a heavy cost to bear, not just because of the general cost of using magic, but just the cost of taking a human life, how it weighs on your soul. So I wish like she'd explore that more, because we'll see later. We just finished part 1. And so I also want to take a moment because she does quite a bit of exposition dumping about the magic system here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this because it really breaks my brain. So the magic system here, like the facts that I know. In Pangu, magic users are called xianglings, and their abilities are called gifts. So Ru Ying has the gift of death and all her sub-abilities. Meiya has the gift of super healing. And now that I think about it, is it just she gets super healing or she gets to heal others? I think it's she gets to heal others, but we never see her use it. And then we get Taohua, who has the gift of superhuman strength. And I'm just gonna list everything we know about the magic system from the entire book, because like, if we're gonna talk about it now, we better talk about it now. So gifts, she says later, are random. That's why we have all these 3 different gifts. We see a couple of gifts later, like fire magic and water magic. And she says like all their rules are random, like no one has the same 2 gifts, and like a gift can be really like big in magnitude or just kind of small, and how big the gift is, the bigger the T drain. So bigger gifts mean a shorter lifespan. It's kind of similar to something like My Hero Academia or X-Men with mutants and quirks. So random, but it's really confusing because, okay, so I'm going to talk about later points in the book, but I kind of want to address this all now. So we know that before Romans came, that like the number of xianglings have been decreasing. But even before Rome came, they went to the Wu Cai temples to learn how to like manage their gift. It's all random. However, she says that magic is bestowed randomly. But later she says that magic is rare, and she says rare in girls. So I'm not really sure which one is true, because I don't think random and rare can be used interchangeably. If it's random, then it should not be discriminatory by gender because it's random. But if it's rare, then it can't be random because random could either mean anything from 100% to 0%. Random is random and rare is rare. At least with something like My Hero Academia, they say, I think pretty much in the beginning, that like 80% of the world the world's population has quirks. So that's like a set establishment of the world. And even then, if magic is rare, it doesn't really feel rare. Quite a lot of the main named cast has magic, like these three here. Later characters we see have magic. Every time she goes to see a new like town or city, she's talking about magic being used on the street. So it doesn't feel rare. And we don't really get a sense of like, oh my god, like yeah, 99% of the world's population was xianglings, but then they were decreasing in number before Rome came. So then like, I'm not really sure here. Because if we're talking about right now, like the Pangu characters that we see now, 3 out of 5 of them have magic. We don't know if the Phantom has magic. There's also like one other named character who shows up once and she has magic. So that's like another character. So that's like 4 characters. And even her father doesn't. So that's like, we're still going on a majority basis here. Like, I don't know if I'm doing statistics right, but this is quite a lot of people to have magic, for magic to be a rare occurrence. Also, the thing is that she mentions is that magic does not follow bloodlines. She says like, if your parents have fire magic, it's not a guarantee that you're gonna have fire magic. Maybe you're gonna have wind magic, maybe you're gonna have no magic. So that kind of still follows My Hero Academia. So in My Hero Academia, if your parents have quirks, it's no guarantee that it's gonna be the same quirk as one of your parents or both of your parents, or a combination quirk, or no quirk. Okay, so like we see examples of all of these in My Hero Academia. As far as we know, Ru Ying and Meiya, their parents did not have magic. And she says it rarely follows bloodlines. So whatever your parents' gift are, it doesn't mean you're gonna get the same. But later we get 2 instances of the child having the same magic as the parent. So again, like rarely follows bloodlines, but we do see 2 of them. So again, like 2 against like the entire world of Pangu, like okay. So again, like this is the first confusing thing about the magic system here. Another important factor when considering a magic system is how magic is perceived. So for example, like in the Grishaverse, for example, each of the countries in that universe have a different attitude towards Grishas. So in Ravka, they're kind of like side-eyed, but generally accepted and are conscripted into the king's army. In Fjerda, they are persecuted, killed, hunted. No bueno. In Shuhan, they are experimented on, and I'm so sorry, I forgot the other country where Jesper was from, but they're like revered, like wow, like totally accepted. You're Grisha, well, like hell yeah, you know? However, I don't really understand in this world how xianglings are perceived exactly, because okay, everything we hear about xiangling and the magic system is through Ru Ying's perspective, and she has a death gift. So like, of course, like her gift in particular is like a little bit like avoided by their neighborhood, by their community or whatever. And she's like, okay, yeah. But she says like magic is a curse. And I'm like, okay, but is it just you actually? And this is kind of a good point to bring up more of Pangu's previous history, because there's more of it. Hoo boy. Previously in Pangu's history, there was a guy called the Qin Emperor. Not the real guy, not the real Qin Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who was the first emperor of China. Thousands of years before Rome's arrival, Pangu was under the thumb of a tyrant called the Qin Emperor, and he used to terrorize and kidnap xianglings and force them in his army to like conquer the neighboring kingdoms. And you know, that's not unlike the real guy Qin Shi Huang, who was a tyrant who conquered neighboring kingdoms to form the basis of the identity of China that we see now. And he did probably maybe killed hundreds of scholars and burned books and stuff like that. But this guy's not that guy. Eventually he was defeated when the Pangu gods descended into mortal bodies and helped the xianglings and the people overthrow the Qin Emperor. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the word god is almost always capitalized, but we never get a specific name for any of the Pangu gods except for one, which we'll explore later. And then anyway, after he was defeated, out came the 5 great empires, not unlike the real guy Qin Shi Huang, when after he died and his heir kind of did a terrible job, it led to the fragmenting of the land that he conquered into, I think it was like, there was a lot of fragmenting done after. I think it was at most 18, at least 3. Anyway, there was a lot of fragmenting after the real guy, and there's a lot of fragmenting after this guy into the 5 great empires. And unfortunately, he's gonna come up again later. So again, I'm not really sure. When Ru Ying says magic is a curse, is she saying her magic is a curse? She has called her magic a curse specifically, but sometimes she says magic is a curse, which feels like generally magic is bad, but Mei Ya has healing magic and Tao Hua has superhuman strength. There doesn't seem to be any active persecution of Xianglings by Pangu people, so I'm not really sure if it's viewed as like a negative thing or like positive neutral. And again, we figure out later that magic has been around since as long as humanity. This guy was kind of an asshole to them, so maybe he shifted it to negative, but like if magic can be born randomly into your family, then I'm sure you're kind of pissed if your loved one is being terrorized by your emperor. And even then, like the Pangu gods descended and then helped the Xianglings overthrow the emperor. And I think we're still talking about the magic system here. It's a good time to segue into the intersectionality of sex and gender and magic in this society, because it's also really confusing. Whenever I say gender or sex, I'm kind of talking a little bit more about sex, because there's no trans characters as far as we know. There's no queer characters as far as we know, except for like one line about Mei Ya never loving a man, or Ru Ying says like Mei Ya would never love a man, that's why I have to marry. So this could mean that Mei Ya likes girls, or this could mean that she hates men. I'm not sure. So I'm probably gonna use sex and gender, but I think when I talk about it, I'm mostly mean sex. So this led to like literally a 2-day mind palace about what Pangu society is. So is Pangu society a patriarchy? Yes, by definition, because its ruling class, its emperor, has a male-based inheritance system. And Ru Ying says women are considered property of men, but what happens when a man dies, like the head of the family dies? Well, where we are now, Ru Ying, Mei Ya, and Nai Nai are doing like okay on their own. Does Nai Nai own the house they live in? Since her husband died, does the deed of her house pass on to her? Could women own and operate their own businesses? How like unfair is the system of law against them? We don't really know. I'm gonna change my battery again. So it is a patriarchy. However, is it also misogynistic? Yes, possibly. Every bad man in Ru Ying's life is from her own family, also from Bai Hu. We don't really know much about Tao Hua's father, other than that he's a general and he did allow his daughters to join the army, so I don't know. Ru Ying's family sucks. But is this indicative of the wider Pangu society at large? I don't know. Ru Ying does talk about how when her father was on drugs, he would rave that like, oh, like your mother should have given me sons. Well, like, he was on drugs, and I don't really recall much about Ru Ying's father before he was on drugs. I don't really know for sure if he was ever a good guy. There's also the treatment of her grandma. She likes to bring up her grandma a lot, like, oh, my grandma is like so smart and she deserved better than my grandfather. And there is also Bai Hu's father. So yeah, like this situation isn't super great, but like there's like Bai Hu like never acted misogynistic, maybe. Perceived by Ru Ying, he seems a little sexist, but again, we are all getting this information from Ru Ying's head. There are like 2 other male Pangu characters that will come in later, and they seem pretty okay. Like they don't really like make any big deal about Ru Ying being a girl when she meets them. But there is a difference between misogynistic and sexist. So, is Pangu society sexist? Yes, kind of. So again, all of this is from Ru Ying's point of view. All of this is from her family backstory. But also we gotta consider how women operate here. So Nai Nai, yes, she is trying to find marriage candidates for Ru Ying, but in my mind it's less about because this is what women do, women have to get married and have kids. No, Nai Nai is just trying to find a sense of security for her family, trying to like make sure that her granddaughters are safe. If hypothetically Ru Ying like told her grandma, like she told Bai Hu, like, hey, look, grandma, I really don't want to get married. Like, would Nai Nai say, okay, sure, like you don't, like if you don't want to get married, you don't have to get married? Or will Nai Nai say, no, like, you know, this is for security? Or will Nai Nai say, well, no, like you're a woman, this is what we do, this is the only thing we can do? Like, what will she say? I don't really know enough about her grandma to guess about what she will say. So in Pangu society, before Roman invasion, like, are arranged marriages the common norm? Her Nai Nai was arranged. I don't really remember if their parents were arranged. I don't recall if it was mentioned. And yes, her Nai Nai is trying to find marriage candidates for her, but is this arranged to the point where Ru Ying will have no choice, or will Nai Nai like get her a bunch of suitors and be like, hey, so I got you a bunch of suitable guys, you choose which one? Which is, I guess, also still a little bit arranged. But again, Ru Ying and her family are a noble family, or like a formally noble family. So if she were like not of a noble class, will she still have to do an arranged marriage? Or let's say, again, in like pre-Rome Pangu, if she found a love match, will she be able to go through with it no matter the class or the status or anything like that? Like, I don't know. And again, now we're adding magic into this. So if the magic is completely random, wouldn't this be a great equalizer between the sexes? So let's use Tao Hua as an example, okay? So Tao Hua has superhuman strength, and she mentions that, like, oh yeah, they only let me in the army now because they're running out of soldiers, and her dad is a general, so that probably helped. Now, if Tao Hua was around during pre-Roman times, would she still be able to join the army on the basis of her superhuman power? A smart society would say, yes, girl, you have superhuman strength and you want to join the army? Hell yeah, right? Why wouldn't they? Because it's a patriarchy? I don't know. So again, I want to bring up the price of the magic, which is the user's own life. Ru Ying says the bigger the gift, the bigger the cost, and there's no way to tell how long a xiaoling has to live before it's too late. And she also mentions in her chapter with her grandma that xianglings feel the urge to use their magic, so they can't just not use it and live a completely normal long life. It appears to be like, you gotta use it and you're gonna live a shorter life. Again, but also, if every gift is random, could any of these abilities like not have that rule? Like, could there be an ability that doesn't use your chi at all or doesn't burn away your chi at all? Could there be a gift that's just, you're immortal? I don't know, who's to say? That's too many like possibilities here, okay? We don't understand the standardized baseline here. Like, it's random. No one can figure it out. That's why we're all scattershot, and that's why we weren't able to beat the Romans. Okay, but magic has been around for literally thousands of years in Pangu society. You'd think they'd be able to figure some things out. And there is the Wu Tai temples who teach magic, so like they must have had some measure of success in order to like help xianglings out. In My Hero Academia, yes, everybody pretty much has a pretty random quirk, right? Roughly, quirks have been around in the My Hero Academia universe for about 100 years. And yet, in the beginning of like when the first quirks were coming around in human society, it was tough. It was like X-Men. It's like, oh my god, like who are these guys? Like, you guys have powers. But now, by the time the story starts of My Hero Academia, like society has completely accepted quirks in general, and they have schools to teach young people how to become heroes, how to control and enhance their quirks. And there is like generally like there is roughly a standardized set of rules that, and also like if your gift is completely random, they're gonna help you figure it out. And the rules are more about less on the quirk system itself and more about like how quirks are organized in society, like quirk registration. But even then they know like a quirk is like using a muscle, and the more you train the muscle, like the better it'll get. So that's how the power you're born with doesn't have to be the power that like it's just that forever. So they're able to like control it, find new ways to work around with it. But again, everything is just so vague here that I don't really know if there is a standard baseline of rules, if everything is randomized. Like, is the tea drain an absolute rule? okay? Is the urge to use the gift an absolute rule that all younglings have? I don't know. Okay, bringing up Taohua. Is her gift of superhuman strength so that her qi is just constantly being drained because she's just strong all the time? Like, let's say Taohua is angry and she breaks a table. The table breaks because she's just so strong, you know, like the type of strength that she sometimes doesn't know how to use. Like, she leans on the door frame and the door frame breaks. Is her qi just constantly being drained on the basis of like strength all the time? Or is her strength that she has to activate it like Iron Fist, and she's like angry, she breaks the table, it doesn't break because she has to activate her superhuman strength, so she concentrates hard, her qi is being used, and she is angry and breaks the table? Is her life force just constantly being drained, or is it like I'm actively using it and then my qi is being drained? Okay. And then she brings up the urge to use magic, like they can't resist it, and that's why they have shorter lives, because they have to use magic. Okay. So like, again, if it's randomized, could someone just not have the urge? Like, what's the cost of resisting? Because Ru Ying tells us when she is fighting Antony's guards after stealing his wallet, she tells us that she can count on one hand how many times she's used her death magic up until that point. We learn later on that the first time she used her magic was 7 years old, right? And then now she's 19 years old. So less than 5 times in 12 years has she used her magic, okay? And she doesn't seem to be like losing her mind. She definitely has like a temptation, like, oh, I really want to use the death magic to kill Romans, but like, is there like a serious cost, or is it just like a constantly annoying itch? Like, how severe is this urge? She has the urge to do death on people. Okay, that's bad. But if Taohua has like the urge to do strength, like what does that mean? Does she have the urge to fight people, or could she like bench press a couple thousand pounds and be all right? But then we also have someone like Maya, and so Maya has a healing ability, right? Again, how strong is the urge? Like, if everybody has an urge, but she has the good gift of healing, what if one day she's like, oh my god, I really feel like the urge to heal someone, but there's no one around like to heal, like everybody's fine. Could her urge be so bad that she injures someone on purpose to heal them and relieve the urge? So again, like, if the urge is a baseline rule, a standardized rule of all gifts, then that manifests differently in different ways. And that's just not explained here. And again, like, is Ru Ying maybe trying to distinguish between a good gift and a bad gift? Because again, like, the urge and the cost of using a good gift can be kind of noble. Like, Taohua has saved our army with her superhuman strength, and she's died young because of it. Oh, Taohua, like, or Maya is like forget about like, oh, what if she injures someone on purpose to do her gift on purpose? Like, oh, Maya, like, she's used her good gift of healing to help the people of this town. Like, oh, Maya, oh, we'll miss you forever. Like, you think, okay, oh, xianglings with good gifts are accepted in society because, like, oh, they died so young, but they did so much good in the world with their magic, right? Okay, so then we have someone like Ru Ying whose magic is death. And then of course she's gonna be like, oh, like, magic is a curse. Like, I'm ostracized by society. Like, this freaking sucks, right? Now, I wish if that is the case, then I wish like it was explained better. Because every time Ru Ying talks about like magic, if she's not specifically talking about her magic, then she's just talking, I feel like she's just talking about magic generally. But does she actually mean like, oh, magic is a curse, her magic is a curse, like everybody has the urge to use magic? Okay, well, is it just you? These abilities are called gifts, so they should be like a generally positive thing accepted in society, whereas like something more neutral called like ability or a quirk, then you can make the distinction easier between good quirks and bad quirks. Again, like, for example, in My Hero Academia, those with good quirks can be accepted in hero society, become a professional hero and save the people. And then you have the people with bad quirks, villainous quirks, and they, on the basis of their quirk, they're like ostracized by society, they're shunned by society, like the leader of the villains, Shigaraki, who has this destructive touch. So like anything he touches with, like, I think it's either like 5 fingers or 10 fingers, anything he touches like will disintegrate. Or you have Toga, who consumes blood to take on the appearance of another person. And like, oh yeah, those are pretty scary powers. And because They're considered scary on the basis of their power. They're ostracized by society and then become villains. But then you do have cases in My Hero Academia where someone with a villainous quirk can be like find their place and become a hero. Like Shinso, and his ability is after someone meets a certain condition, he can tell them what to do. It's called brainwashing. Again, I'm not sure if there is a distinction between good gifts and bad gifts. It's not very clear. Considering the intersection of sex and magic, or gender and magic, bringing up Taohua, could she join the army on the basis of her power? Okay, she is a woman though, so in pre-Roman times, would she be accepted into the army? But, oh, you're a woman, so like at some point you should get married and have kids, right? Would she be expected to do that? Could she choose not to marry and have kids and just stay in the army? And could she be accepted by society if she does that, or would she be shunned? Or could she like, hey, okay, I'm gonna get married now and have kids, but can I still be in the army? Would she be accepted? Like, these are all like various possibilities that I don't know the answer to if it were pre-Roman times. And I'm not even really sure if it could happen like during Roman times. It's been 20 years since the Roman invasion of Pangu. I don't think 20 years is a long enough time for the status of rights of women in society to change. I feel like there would be some pushback if like for some reason after the Roman invasion, like Pangu society rolled back on its like rights for women. And again, as I mentioned before, we learn later that again, xianglings have been around since the dawn of time. So you think, with all these questions that I just brought up here, you think they'd figure out some rules or just like be more secure and like have more things be common knowledge? Like after 100 years, yeah, My Hero Academia society isn't perfect, but they figured it out. If it's not real war, it's like a Cold War type of like thing they're dealing with here. You think like with real wartime, women would be able to step up into positions left behind by men who died in the war. So I've been talking way too long about this magic system, but I'm gonna keep talking about it. So a friend did tell me that she heard that this was a Zutara inspired romance. Okay, so let's not talk about Zutara, but let's talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender and why that intersection of gender and sex makes more sense than this. Okay, so starting with the obvious, could Pangu society be inspired in part by the water tribes? Possibly yes, because in the water tribes, they're patriarchal and they're sexist. Men fight and women heal. However, they all have the same ability of water bending. It's not random, and it's never implied that men's water bending is inherently more powerful on the basis of their sex than women's. Even though Master Paku makes it feel that way. I don't exactly remember like all of the exact quotes and lines, but he's like, oh, you're a girl? Well, you better go to the healing hut and the boys will learn how to fight. If it were all random, you can't put Tao Hua in a healing hut with superhuman strength. Okay, so like, let's take a step back for real life history. Like going back to when like humans first learned how to grow a wheat on purpose. Men fought and women cared for the home because they were making babies and men had testosterone. Okay, so then it starts to become sexist when you confine women only to specific roles, wife, mother, healer, etc. And it becomes misogynistic when it's considered that women are inherently worth less than men solely based on their gender and their sex, and womanly roles are less respected and less valued. The water tribes, from what I know and what I remember, is that they're sexist, sure, but they're not misogynistic. If they were like well and truly misogynistic, then like no woman is allowed to do water bending, like women only have to be healers, and like, oh, you're a boy and you want to be a healer? Psst, that's a woman's job. That's misogynistic. I don't think it's misogynistic because Princess Yue is a well-respected figure in her society. Her parents begged the moon spirit to save her when she was a baby, and if they were truly misogynistic, they could have just let her die on the basis of being a girl. It's true that she can't leave the Northern Water Tribe, but she is a princess and a royal, but she can go out and about in the city, like on her own. I don't remember if she sneaks out, but she is able to go out with Sokka on a date on her own, even even though she was engaged. So I don't think the water tribe, specifically the northern water tribe, I don't think it's misogynistic. It is sexist, and sexism is solved when Master Paku marries Katara's grandma. Hooray! There is also Princess Yue's fiance, but I don't exactly remember, but I think he was just an asshole, so let's just forget about him. Okay, bringing this back to Zutara. Could the Roman Empire be inspired in part by the Fire Nation? On the basis of colonization, sure. On the basis of their treatment of women, I don't know. Because, and the answer may shock you, is that we never see a single Roman woman. So I don't know if they're less sexist because we don't meet a single Roman woman. Okay, but let's talk the Fire Nation, right? Colonialization aside, yes, the Fire Nation society is shown to be less sexist. Even during the events of Avatar: The Last Airbender, we see that women are in positions of power, like Azula. We see that they have the same jobs as men, like in the prison of the Boiling Rock. We also have Mai, Ty Lee, other side characters, and then later in Legend of Korra, Zuko's daughter Izumi becomes Fire Lord. But there's still colonizers in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I can go on and on about like the comparisons between like Last Airbender and X-Men and My Hero Academia, but for now I've talked way too long. My poor camera has to have breaks because the internal battery temperature is going too high. Finally, we start with part 2. Ru Ying wakes up in a prison cell. She sees like other Pangu people in other cells, like crying out, like, oh my god, like, can you please like crying and telling the Roman guards to please let them out. This girl does not make the connection between what Tao Hua told her about the kidnapped Xianglings and the blood-drained bodies. So she's like, oh, I can use my death magic to get out of here, but she has magic blocking bracelets on her wrists. We see a guard named Dawson, a lovely Roman name, by the way. He was the guard that she showed mercy to after she stole Antony's wallet, and she's like, ah, man, I should have killed that guy. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna enjoy killing you, like completely an asshole. And she's like, oh, I gotta try to find a way out of here. Like, I don't know what happened to my sister. My grandma is gonna find me, like she's gonna not find me at home. She's like trying to figure out a way out. A couple of days later, Tao Hua is brought in, and she's like, oh fuck, like Tao Hua, she's the daughter of a general, like she's completely in despair, like, oh my god, like Tao Hua was brought in because of me. And then her hope is further shattered when Bai Hu visits her in prison, and he's like, Ru Ying, you're not supposed to be here. Like, they agreed to only keep their kidnappings in the rural areas. They're not supposed to touch Jing City. They weren't supposed to take her. Like, that whole raid on her neighborhood was like totally not part of the deal. And she's like, bro, you knew that they were kidnapping Pangu people all along? She's done, so she turns her back on him. So more days pass. She's finally taken out of the cell and into a glass arena with other Xianglings who are displaying their powers. And she sees Antony is there, and she realizes that that was the boy whose wallet she stole, and she's like, oh man, it's all because I stole his wallet that I'm stuck in prison, am I? And she also sees that the first prince of Rome is there, Prince Valentin. I'm really sorry, Thomas from Måneskin. He's blonde, so I had to choose the blonde member of Måneskin. So she's in the glass arena, and they're here, and they're like forcing Xianglings to display their powers, and they're rejecting or accepting them based on like their usefulness, right? So this is the part where she brings up like the random aspect of the magic, so I really quickly want to read it here. Magic was bestowed randomly, and gifts varied in startling magnitudes. By the will of the gods, our gifts are as often as unique as we were, as the lines of our fingertips. This girl, the girl who's displaying her powers in front of the princes, this girl was born with the ability to move water, but another might be able to freeze water, another might evaporate water, and another might possess the ability to draw water from thin air. And somewhere out there was a rare talent who can do all four, if not more. There was no telling what someone's power might be and what they might be capable of if provided the right training. No two gifts operated in the same way, obeyed the same rules. This was why nobody knew how much qi burned with each use, not until a Xiangling's dying breath. It seems that like the only always accepted rule is that qi has to be burned. Again, if it is completely random, could there be someone who can do it without burning qi? I gotta keep moving. The girl who moves water is not accepted and she's taken away somewhere. A girl who can bring plants back to life, she's accepted. Ru Ying is up. Antony knows that she has the power over her death. And then, yeah, later he's like, yeah, I asked around your neighborhood and like, yeah, you're the girl who has the power over death. That's how he knows specifically her gift, right? So she's asked to use her power on a captured Pangu boy. And the poor boy's like, girl, I don't want to die. And she's like, I don't want to die either. And this is really fucked up, right? And so she does use the magic. And the princes are impressed. So they're like, okay, Ru Ying, you pass. But it turns out that she didn't kill the boy completely again. And when the boy is like, oh, like stirring around because he's actually alive, everyone's distracted, like, what? And she's like, all right, I'm gonna escape. So she's attempting to escape, but she's caught. So Valentin is like, I'm gonna make you an opium addict so I can control you. But Antony's like, no, I need her lucid. I'm claiming her. And saves her from being injected with opium. So Ru Ying is suffering from the injuries of her escape attempt, and Antony approaches her in her cell and tells her like, hey, I don't want to go to war. I don't want Pangu to suffer. And for some reason, they like, as they're talking while she's in a prison cell, it feels like witty, flirty banter. First off, I'm hung up on Unit 731, and I'm also hung up on she's in prison, presumably because he was looking for her. That's why there was a raid on her neighborhood, but she doesn't make that connection. I guess she just thinks like, hey, they raided my neighborhood. Oh, it just so happens that the guy whose wallet I stole and who I did magic in front of is here. He's like, hey, you have a grandma and a sister, right? And she's like, don't touch them. And he has the remote control that activates the electrocution on her bracelets. So after all that, he makes her an offer. Hey, look, can you use your death magic in exchange for your family's protection and assassinate the Arlong Emperor's advisors and people who want to incite and like are pushing to start a war against Rome, right? So he's asking her to kill her own people because he's like, look, if war happens, innocent people are gonna die and Pangu is definitely going to lose. And so she's like, that makes sense. She says that she knows Antony's manipulating her and is like, he's like speaking her language, like using like Pangu proverbs. She's like, yeah, he's definitely manipulating me, but what he's saying makes sense. Girl defeatist. So she's like, okay, I'll take you up on your offer, but I have 3 conditions. One is that she use her power as little as possible due to the cost of her qi, her life force. And 2, if she does perish, then he must take care of her family, like no matter what. And 3, he gets Tao Hua released from the prison. And he's like, I don't know if I can release Tao Hua. And she's like, no, you better release Tao Hua or else I am not doing it. So he's like, okay, fine, I'll see what I can do. Antony's like, okay, so now that we're working together, are you strong enough to use the death magic to kill? But he frames it in such a interesting way. I'll read this to you, okay? So this is page 119. Are you strong enough to wield such magic? Because all I've seen so far is weakness, hesitation. You spared Dawson's life, and you spared that boy in the glass cage. You even spared the guards who would have done anything to kill you, because as she was doing her escape attempt, she was using death magic, but again, she wasn't death magicking to kill. You've shown mercy at every turn, as if you were afraid of your own potential, of all that you could become. I can't help but laugh. Of all that you could become. I need to know whether that is merely kindness or a form of weakness. Can you wield the extraordinary gift that has manifested within your body, or are you just a girl given more than she can handle? My jaw tightened. I didn't say anything because he was right. I had shown mercy even to the soldiers whose throats I had made sure to cut just deep enough to hinder, but not deep enough to mortally wound. Okay, sorry, sidebar real quick. I don't understand how you can slit a throat. I really don't get like how you can slit a throat to be hindering but not mortally wounded, because like there's a lot of arteries and shit in your neck here. The jugular, perhaps. I don't know. Again, maybe someone smarter than me like can get like, oh, how can I? Okay, sorry. Because like if I were Ru Ying and trying to escape, I would stab them in the back of the knees or in the back of the foot. Anyway, okay. Back to this. Death was cruel and it was permanent. I didn't know those men. They might work for the enemy, but that wasn't a reason to kill in cold blood, so I didn't. But henchmen have lives too. Roll the clip from Austin Powers, I guess.
People never think how things affect the family of a henchman.
I just don't know how to make of this, right? Because like, sure, Ru Ying spent like a whole paragraph talking about how handsome he is. And then also there was this other part before this deal happened when she first sees Antony and Valentin in the glass arena. For some reason, there's this little part that goes like, I've never seen Valentin do any acts of kindness, because she's still like, I guess, so impressed by the time he gave a beggar girl whose mother died of opium money. She's like, yeah, I never saw Valentin do anything nice. Antony did something nice. Also, he's a prince, so he can protect me more than Bai Hu can. I'm like, girl, what delulu world are we living in? And then he coerces her into a deal that forces her to do labor assassination, using magic that costs her her life force, using her family as leverage, did I mention that, while she's in prison, after he's electrocuted her once, and yet he's like, girl, you gotta own up to your own potential. And she's like, yeah, he's right. I'm like, what? Antony takes Ru Ying out of prison and he takes her to like Baihu's drug house brothel place where he works. And so like they see each other really briefly, but like Antony's like dismisses Antony. So Antony dismisses Baihu, and then Antony's like, okay, Ru Ying, look out the window. Do you see that guy there? I want you to kill him. And she's like, what? Yeah, kill him with this gun. And she's like, what? No, I'm not gonna do it. So then like, and he's like, okay. And then he does it. And then he's like, yeah, that man wasn't just a random guy. That was a phantom spy. So then Antony takes her back to her house where Maya and her grandma are. And she's like, yo, yeah, why are we here? And he's like, look, I need to remind you what's at stake. And he gives her the gun and he's like, shoot me. And she's like, what? No, I can't shoot you. Because she's like, dude, if I kill a prince of Rome, like blah, blah, blah. And then Antony's like pressuring her. It's like, shoot, I'm going to start a countdown. And she's like, oh God. And then she like 5. And it's like, ah. It's so dramatic. She's like, she pulls the trigger on him, and obviously there's no bullets in it. And he's like, look, I need to remind you what's at stake here. Like, your family's at stake here. You gotta follow my orders. And she's like, oh my God. And I'm like, oh my God. So they go to the Roman side of Din City. Remember, there's a fence in this city, very West Berlin, East Berlin. And so he takes her back to his house on the Antony side, on the Roman side. Also, the Roman side is devoid of people. So again, we do not meet a single Roman woman. So at his house, he throws another challenge at Ru Ying. A fight to the death with a Xiangling man that I guess he just keeps at his house, who has the gift of like multiplying himself, right? And he's like, yeah, he's a bad man, so fight to the death. In this point, there's a little flashback, and she's like, she remembers the time she first killed someone with her death magic. She was 7 years old, and she had another childhood friend named Hushan who can manipulate water, and he's like one of the 2 instances of a bloodline gift. So one day they're having fun in the water, they're cliff diving, but Hushan is like taking a prank way too far and like holding her down in the water, and like Ru Ying is like, oh shit, like she's drowning, right? She grabs onto like this golden light that she sees, and turns out it was Hushan's qi, and she pulls it and accidentally kills him. And so after that, she is kind of shunned by like the rest of her community, except Tao Hua, who stood by her side. We're back at Antony's death match, and she's like telling the Xiangling man like, no, we don't have to fight, we don't have to be Rome's puppets. But then the Xiangling man was like, I thought the girl blessed by death would be harder to kill. Death should have blessed a man. And she's like, I am worthy. And then she kills him. She feels bad about taking another life, but Don't worry, Antony gives her a hug and tells her it'll get easier for her as it did for him. Ow, that's my necklace. And he takes this opportunity to reveal his tragic backstory. So he reveals to her that he's actually not a Prince of Rome by blood. He was actually adopted from the streets where he was homeless with his parents. And one day, he, like Ru Ying did, saw the late Prince of Rome on the street and stole his wallet. He is dead, but he's kind of important. So I will be putting up his picture here. So he stole... We don't know his name, by the way. That's why I called him Antony's adopted daddy-o. I flipped through this book so many times, I do not know his name. So anyway, Antony steals his wallet on the street one day, just like Ru Ying did, but he got him, like, found him in his home, or like his home under a bridge or something, and he's like, hey, so either you're gonna die or you're gonna kill your parents and be adopted by me. And so Antony kills his own biological parents and becomes adopted and is granted the title of the second Prince of Rome. So that's why he's like, you know, I grew up poor, Ru Ying. Every time I walk Pangu streets, I'm reminded of when my parents had to beg for money. And she's like, oh my God, he's being so vulnerable to me. Like, he's like, I should just read it. This is the passage right after he reveals his like tragic backstory and his goal that like he doesn't want innocent people to suffer. So this is from page 160. His voice cracked just a little. A breath of silence as he straightened himself, as he blinked away the mist in his eyes. This is why I rarely venture beyond the fence, not because I'm disgusted by your kind, as so many like to assume, but because I am ashamed. Oh my God, privileged boy is like so ashamed that he's privileged. His voice was quieter as he continued, like the sharing of a secret. This was a man who had lived most of his life needing to be strong, to be ruthless, and here he was showing me the cracks in his armor, the angles from which I could hurt him. A predator rolling over to expose the soft of his belly. These are a lot of metaphors. This was him extending an olive branch. Oh my God, another metaphor. Attempting to earn my trust. And then he just continues going on and on about like, I know what it's like to be poor, Ru Ying. Okay, so after this whole deathmatch thing, and he shares his tragic backstory, he takes her to one of Rome's armories, and he shows her that they have missiles and fighter jets and all sorts of crazy modern advanced technology for warfare. And he's like, yeah, look at all this weaponry we have. Like, if we go to war, we're going to decimate you. And she's like, oh damn, he's right. And so, and like also as he's showing her all of Rome's weapons, he's like weirdly kind of defending his grandfather a little bit. His grandfather who like kind of started this whole thing. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus. We don't know the grandfather's name. It could be Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus. I just use this picture because he is in real life the founder of the Roman Empire, and the last name Augustus, ever since this guy, has been used as a title for rulers of the Roman Empire. Okay, so like I just want to bring up this like weird little passage as he's showing her Rome's weapons, and he's like, yeah, like my grandfather will do anything to get what he wants, and he's like talking about like life back in Rome, right? Okay, so this is what he says on page 164. My grandfather wants results. He's never been one to consider the collateral costs of his goals as long as he gets what he wants. He was raised in a different time, my father used to say, when war ravaged our world. Rome is under attack from all sides, land and sea, against the other superpowers of our world. We don't get any names of these superpowers. Like, when was Carthage? Like, were they trampled by elephants? Okay, I don't know. Back to the quote. All fighting for the same finite resources. Wars ravaged for decades. Our family's right to rule was challenged over and over again. We lost lands, claimed lands, this is going on, forced others from their capitals, then we lost our capital. So much happened, so much was lost. My grandfather lived through an unfathomable amount of trauma, memories that shaped who he is today, someone who will do everything to protect his home. So he says that, and I'm like, are you defending your grandpa a little bit? I can't really tell. Is he just trying to explain his actions or justify them? I can't really tell. He's like, yeah, my grandfather lived during a different time when Hannibal's elephants rampaged all over our capital. I don't know, there's been about like, how many? Like 8 sieges on Rome or something? Like, how far are we drawing from real history here? I have no idea. This, like, no matter what, the ends justify the means. We gotta stop war, no matter what. So she's like, yeah, I'll become your magical death assassin. And she kills a bunch of Pangu rebels who want to steal and interrupt Roman operations because they risk inciting war. And her reason is that, again, survival no matter what. And she believes that Antony will be able to ascend the Roman throne and become a good ruler. End of part 2. So now that we've reached the end of part 2, I want to take this interlude to talk about Antony and what we know about him so far. Again, I keep going back to the author's note mentioning Unit 731. We can figure out pretty easily that the prison Ru Ying was from was probably the human experimentations lab that Antony has a degree of control over. He uses her family as leverage to make her do forced labor that uses magic at the cost of her life. And yet, the narrative is trying so hard with all these descriptions about how handsome he is and how tender he is and how warm he is, with his talk of like, oh girl, you gotta own up to your potential, and I identify with you, Ru Ying. We're both two bad people trying to do good things in the world. And he's like crying after recounting his tragic backstory. And I'm like, are we supposed to sympathize with him too? Or as the first time I was reading this, I was like, is this actually like carefully crafted manipulation to get her to like be on his side, using like manipulation tactics to get her on his side, like pretending to be vulnerable so that she can like follow his orders? Like, I was thinking like, oh, is he trying to be like a Mother Gothel type character where she like uses subtle abusive parent tactics to get Rapunzel to do what she wants? But like Ru Ying says, it's like, oh, but he really means it. And I'm like, but is it true that he really means it by the narrative, or is it true because Ru Ying thinks it's true? Okay, so I'm not really sure. Legitimately, on one page, Antony would be yelling at her and insulting her. Like, I thought the Pangu people would be a superior race, and she's insulted, and then he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings. Legit, this would be like within 2 pages. And I'm a little bit like, that's very toxic boyfriend behavior. Being like slapped with one hand and then soothed with the same hand. It's like throwing insults at her, and then he's like, no babe, I didn't really mean it. So then also at this point, I was thinking like, okay, is he gonna be a Darkling type love interest? And again, like bringing this back to Zuko. Yes, Zuko is part of the Fire Nation, but he is starting at a different place than the Fire System, than the Fire Nation greater power. Right, so at the start of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Zuko is already exiled. He doesn't have access to the same resources as he would if he weren't exiled. He isn't able to exert much power. He's bullied pretty much by his own people for being the exiled prince, because he wanted to show mercy, because he didn't want to kill people, and he didn't want to fight his father. Second off, about Zuko, his redemption arc takes full 3 seasons to complete, right? So he's a complicated person, to be sure. In the beginning, he still does bad things, but he learns and grows over the course of 3 seasons of the TV show in order to become a better person. I don't really understand what's going on with Antony here, because as I was reading, I was thinking like, are we trying to do all seasons of Zuko in one person at the same time? And third off, Zuko in season 3 willingly gives up Fire Nation intel, helps Katara get revenge for the death of her mother, and urges her not to kill people. I can't think of like how, if it's even possible to do both a Zuko and a Darkling type romance plotline. At this point, end of part 2, I really don't understand what I'm supposed to think of Antony. Of course, if let's say Ru Ying thinks he's a nice guy, but he's really not, he's really trying to manipulate her, I think it is difficult to trick the character but not the reader. Reading about abusive tactics, of course, like the victim, I hate to use, I don't want to use the word, but in this case, like the victim is like coerced and like made to think he's a good guy. It's a little bit like Stockholm syndrome, but Stockholm syndrome may or may not be real. Anyway, I'm not gonna go into Stockholm syndrome, but yeah, no. If the goal of the narrative is to trick Ru Ying but not the reader that Antony's actually a bad guy, it's a difficult balance to maintain, but I think it's possible. Ru Ying is falling for it, and we're like, no, Ru Ying, don't fall for it. If that was the goal, I don't think it was accomplished very well. There are advantages and disadvantages to every type of perspective you take when you're writing a book. First person, third person, second person. In this case, we are in a first person limited perspective stuck in Ru Ying's head. Everything we learn about the world is through her perspective and her limits of her knowledge. So everything that she says to us, we don't know if it's true. And I'm sure there's a way to like craft an unreliable narrator, but I'm just confused all the time. Okay, so like at this point, I don't know how long I've been filming, so let's continue on with part 3. 6 months pass, and Ru Ying has taken the lives of 49 people. So I kind of feel like condition 1 has already been like not fulfilled. Her condition to him that she takes as little a little amount of lives as possible. She's taken 49 lives in 6 months on behalf of Antony. During this time, her grandma and her sister are subtly being taken care of with like manipulations to like their trades that they can get more money, and they're given an opium supply so that Maya can still be taken care of and not suffer from withdrawal. And every time she's out, she like watches them from a distance like Batman. She can't let her family too close to the danger. But then one day she is caught by Maya, and Maya's like, oh my god, what Pangu told me is true, you're working for the Romans? And she's like, no, like I'm working for Antony, like, and Antony is a good man, like I'm trying to stop the war, like no matter what, because like we're gonna be decimated, like no matter what. And she's like, no, like I'd rather die fighting for freedom than live life under Roman rule. Again, they're fighting, and this time Maya's like, you know what, you're not my sister, and completely disowns her. So Ru Ying, she like brokenhearted, goes back to the Roman side of the fence to Antony's house. His guard Dawson is still here, and he's like, you're late, and electrocutes her. And apparently this is like a thing that has happened where like Dawson thinks like you're late and electrocutes her. And I'm a little bit like, Antony very easily can tell Dawson, hey dude, don't do that. Later we find out that Antony knows that she's been visiting her family anyway. So after some electrocution, she goes back to Antony's house, but Antony's not there. It's Valentin, and he's drinking wine. Because she thinks he's drunk, Ru Ying is like, oh, maybe I can get some intel out of him. And so he says like, nah man, he's just as cool as the rest of us. Because they have a third brother named Cassius, who is a general back in Rome. And he's like, yeah, I can't wait to return to Rome, but we can't go back until our grandfather gets what he wants. And she's like, what does he want? And he's like, oh, I'm not telling you. And so he's like, he's definitely the evil brother, because he's like, oh, I think Rome should take all of Pangu for itself and destroy the people, because Rome is dying from natural disasters and plague and climate change. They don't use the term climate change, but it's basically climate change. And he attacks Ru Ying and attempting to inject her with opium again to make her an addict. And Ru Ying fights back, and Antony comes back in the nick of time to stop them. And Valentin's like, oh, she's feral, like we gotta take her off the mission. But Antony's like, no, I trust her. Yeah, you can trust her, because she has no choice but to do what you say. So anyway, after that, she's practicing in a shooting range. I don't know why, because she never uses a gun after this point. And Antony's like, oh, I'm sorry for Valentin's behavior. I know you've been visiting your family in secret. And she's like, what? And she's panicking. And he's like, no, like you should see your family, because like I know you're hurting inside from killing all these people on my behalf. And they have sort of like this weird, vulnerable, intimate conversation. Again, like they both know what it's like to be poor. They both know what it's like to be starving. They both wield the power over death. magic and privilege. And Antony is like, girl, you shouldn't be ashamed of your own ambition. And I'm like, what ambition? Is her ambition to like just go apeshit, or is her ambition to protect her family? And he's like, oh yeah, you should be, you're a god who deserves to be worshipped. It looks like they're about to kiss, but they don't. And he's like, the next mission, you have to accompany me to Sihai. And then she's like, so the rumors are true that Sihai is planning to sign a separate treaty with Rome? And he's like, yeah, because again, the unequal treaty that was signed 20 years ago was between all 5 empires of Pangu. But Sihai is planning to sign a separate treaty. What are the terms? We don't know yet. One day, Ru Ying is back on the Pangu side of the fence, and Baihu finds her, and he reveals that, dun dun dun, he's actually a double agent for the Phantom. And he's been pretending to work with the Romans this whole time. But Ru Ying is like, that doesn't change my mind. I think the Phantom is just another manipulator who's hiding behind his followers. Like, he fed the lie to Maya that opium will make her gift stronger. He's just gonna lead us to death by Roman weapons. And Baihu is like, Ru Ying, you're being selfish. Like, you fell for Antony's like sweet talk and his lies because your self-esteem is low. He literally uses the word self-esteem. And like, Antony's a monster under the mask. She's basically like, you don't know him like I do. And legit, he's like, hey, do you know what they do to xianglings that don't pass, remember, in the glass arena? And she literally says like, I don't care. Again, we know that this is unit 731, and I'm a little bit like shocked, but she's like, Baihu, you like, if you touch Antony, you're gonna make an enemy out of both of us. And I'm like, I'm scared. Ru Ying and Antony go sail for Sihai, and Sihai again means 4 seas, so I know it's more of a water-based country. Ru Ying is like thinking about like what, like her conversation with Maya and her conversation with Baihu, and she's like, am I doing the right thing? And then Antony reveals the target, which is the Sihai Emperor himself. And she's like, no way am I gonna I can't kill the Sihai Emperor. Like, if I kill a royal descendant of the gods, like, it's gonna be a curse on my bloodline. And Antony is like, no, this must be a lie told to her people to protect the royals. Quick side note, it's at this point he mentions the gods of his world, which are, and I quote from page 240, Neptune and Pluto, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. And I'm like, okay, not getting deep in the sauce about like the differences between Greek and Roman gods, but Neptune and Poseidon are basically the same god, and Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades are Greek gods, and Pluto and Hades are also the same god. Again, I'm not really sure. They're just pulling real world mythological figures from different. Anyway, so I was like totally taken out by that. And anyway, he's like, girl, you killed so many people at this point. Like, what's one more? We're all going to hell. And she's like, you have a point. I've gone too far already. I'm gonna go to hell. But he's like, but how are you feeling? Because after her last kill, she's like coughing up blood, and she's like, yeah, no, I think the Xiangling early death is catching up to me. And he was like, oh darn, I thought that was also a lie told to Xianglings so that the royals can protect themselves. Like, that was another lie to control you, but like I'll figure out a way to save you with like Roman signs. And she's like, nah man, this is my fate. They finally meet Emperor Sihai and his son, Prince Feng. They don't show up a whole lot, but I just kind of wanted to make these jokes. I'm gonna put him over here. And Ru Ying is like so affected by like this kind looking older male emperor, because she's literally like, yeah, you know, sometimes I wondered what it would have been like if my grandfather was still alive and was a nice guy. And so she's like, oh, this kind older gentleman is so nice. And so she like presses Antony like, hey, look, come on, man, why do we have to kill the Sihai Emperor? And so he's like, Ru Ying, this better not leave this room. And she's like, okay, like, tell me why you have to kill him. So he reveals that he specifically wants her to kill him after their treaty is signed. signed. He reveals that the treaty is like non-interference. So like Sihai will like we don't deal with you, you don't deal with us. Like this is gonna be peaceful, right? So if she kills him after the treaty is signed, then as per Pangu / Chinese / Confucius filial piety, Prince Feng, even though he will ascend the throne, since this treaty is his father's last decree, he won't be able to reverse or break it, because he's a good son. But then she's like, no, like this gives you the hypothetical advantage over my home of Arlang, because if like, let's say tomorrow your grandfather decides to wage war on Arlang, then they can't call on Sihai for aid. And then she asks him like, hey, if your grandfather orders an attack tomorrow, like will you disobey him? And he says no. But like, hey, look, I've been doing my best to prevent an attack for as long as I can. But she's like, no, then what have I been doing for the last 6 months? Am I just prolonging the inevitable destruction of Pangu despite all these assassinations? Like, are you a coward too, who like thinks that what he's doing is good, but doesn't have the courage to do what's actually right? But Antony's like, are you gonna back out? And she's like, no. That's a lie. Sorry, I had to swap my memory card, and now I'm really scared about how long the raw footage is gonna be, but we're gonna keep going. So anyway, Ru Ying is like, oh man, we gotta kill the Sihai Emperor. I really don't want to. So later that night, she's like racked with guilt. She's like, oh man, what are my grandma and my sister gonna think of me? So she sneaks out to find the Sihai Emperor and his son in his office, and she's like, Emperor, like Antony's planning to assassinate you tomorrow. Like I'm so sorry. And he's like, yeah, girl, I knew this was gonna happen. And she's like, what? And yeah, Prince Feng is like, Dad, like, why are you doing this? Like, please reconsider. Like, we have to fight. Like, very much like similar to Baihu and Maya. They're like, these Roman invaders are stealing our homes and our livelihoods, but like the Sihai Emperor is like, my son, like I'm an old man now, like if my death can bring a few more years of peace, then it's worth it, and I hope you'll be a good emperor after I'm gone. And poor Ru Ying is like distraught over this dilemma. Is it worth it to fight for freedom? Like, or should we survive no matter what? And the Sihai Emperor is like, perhaps it is fate that brought you to me, and tells her a prophecy. To quote from page 262, with his other hand, the emperor reached across the table and held mine. Fate has brought you to me for a reason, young Ru Ying. My stargazers once said death only blesses a mortal when the world is at the verge of chaos, and his protege will either save the world or destroy it. So there's a prophecy here now. I just want you all to know that. The next morning, the treaty is scheduled to be signed at noon. So in the morning beforehand, the Sihai Emperor and Prince Feng take Antony and Ru Ying and their guards on like a little tour of the beautiful river city of Sihai. And like Prince Feng is like being very proud. It's like, yeah, these river cities. So he says like, yeah, the river is full of magic. It was what protects us from invaders. And Antony is like kind of getting actually really annoying because he's like judging the boat that they're in, even though it's like powered by magic. He's like you should consider some bulletproof glass. And Prince Feng is like we don't need input from you. And like of course the Sihai Emperor is like, Feng Ar, that's a term of endearment for children. Like Feng Ar, like just calm down. Frankly, Antony's kind of being really annoying because he's like saying like, this is a quote from 265, like everything needs to be updated eventually. Everything can be improved. This is how humans evolve. And then Prince Feng says like, you keep telling yourself that, but the people of Pangu like how things are. We're even trying to simmer down. Antony keeps bringing up how much better Roman technology is. And then finally Prince Feng is like, oh, you Romans are so cruel. Like, do you even know what it's like to like care about something other than yourself? And Antony says yes. And then Ru Ying laughs at him for some reason. She doesn't really give a good reason why, she just laughs and she's like, oops, sorry. Anyway, Antony has been feeling seasick this whole time, so he leaves like the main area of the boat and like goes off to the side, and Ru Ying follows him to like apologize for laughing. But Antony's like, I wanted to see if you were okay. Like, do you want to still go through with the assassination? Because like Rhysand, he says she has a choice. She doesn't. she asks like, hey, does he does he really have to die? But he's like, no, sorry. And she's like, damn, he'll only ever be on his own side. So she reveals that the Sihai Emperor knows of his own assassination and is willing to go through with it. Since he's willing to keep the treaty, Antony, okay, like, does he really have to die? And Antony's like angry now, and he's like, look, Ru Ying, like, do I even want to know where you know this from? Like, I'm willing to turn a blind eye on some things that you do, but never tell me what to do. And at this moment, arrows come flying at them on the boat, and Ru Ying pushes Antony out of the way of the first arrow, but Antony pushes her out of the way of the second arrow and takes it in the shoulder. And it's the phantom rebels called Ghosts who have ambushed the boat to take Antony alive. Antony's guards and the Sihai Emperor's guards are both protecting Antony, and the ghosts are taking over the boat, and like there's chaos everywhere. Antony's taken inside because inside the main area of the boat there is like an iron curtain, sort of like chainmail. So he's like, yeah, we don't need bulletproof glass, we got our own thing going on. So while Antony is being like magically healed, because there's magical healers on this boat, there's this little aside where like his shirt is open. Ooh. But then she sees that he has whip scars all over his back. I'm like, oh no, his grandfather was abusive. Wow, who knew? Tragic backstory, am I right? Antony's like, you idiot, why didn't you run? And Antony says, I didn't want to see you hurt. But Ru Ying is like she says in her head, like, I didn't want to see you hurt either. It's a bloodbath. Everybody's fighting, and Ru Ying like sees that like there's a lost child on the shore or whatever. I couldn't really picture it very well. And an arrow like hits the child and kills him, and it's like, and it's really brutal. It's like, oh my god, like, and she doesn't even know where the arrow came from. So this is like really affirms like the collateral damage. Anyway, a couple of ghosts make it onto the boat. I'm trying to figure, okay, I'm gonna put it here. So a couple of ghosts make it onto the boat. This isn't even that big of a character, but I just wanted to make this joke. So a couple of ghosts make it onto the boat, and one in a gold mask says the Phantom wants Antony alive. So Ru Ying is like, not on my watch, and like defends against the ghosts using her death magic. But her death magic actually can be resisted. Like, she doesn't know why exactly, but she thinks it's like, oh, their resolve to live is what resists my magic. So they're kind of tough, like, to take down. So Ru Ying struggles a little bit, but she managed to get some to fall unconscious without killing them. But again, like, she's been coughing up blood. She's killed 49 people. And so she's like, oh, like, the cost of my magic is catching up to me. So she takes out a knife in her boot, but the gold mask gets close to Antony, and the Sihai Emperor is defending him with his magical water shield. But then the gold mask gets impatient, and he's like, look, the Phantom prefers Antony alive, but he doesn't have to be. So the gold mask, it's not really sure what power exactly the gold mask has. Really quickly, like, Antony has a gun and does shoot at the gold mask, but it seems like a Wonder Woman, like a ricochet. So, but the gold mask has fire magic and like throws fire magic at the Sihai Emperor's water shield. So I don't know if like bullet redirection counts as a sub ability of fire magic, but anyway. So throwing fire magic at the Sihai Emperor who's defending Antony, but the Sihai Emperor drops his shield at the last second and takes the full hit and is mortally wounded. Like, Ru Ying has like a death sense. She's like, oh yeah, no, there's no getting back from that. And the gold mask is like, oh shit, retreat, cause like the book says like, oh man, they didn't mean to kill him. So with his dying breath, the Sihai Emperor makes his son promise to sign the treaty and never go to war against Rome. And he's like, I agree, father. He agrees, unfortunately, and he dies in his son's arms. And Prince Feng is so distraught that his own water magic goes out of control and sweeps Antony and Ru Ying off the boat. Oh man, I'm gonna pin this up. Okay, so swept off the boat, Ru Ying is like passes out in the current, right? And then when she wakes up, she's in an abandoned cottage with Antony, and she's injured in her abdomen. And Antony is like, yeah, I managed to get us out. I found this abandoned cottage and I patched you up and changed you into dry clothes. And he's like blushing a little bit because of it. And now Ru Ying thinks is like, I owe him 2 life debts now. One for the arrow and one for getting her out of the water. They're being all close and junk in this cottage. And she's like, we're all alone in this this cottage. Maybe we can just be a boy and a girl and not a Roman prince and a magic death assassin. So she's the one who gets the bed, right? She's been like passed out in this cottage, right? So she's like, hey, it's cold. You want to share the bed with me? And like, they both know it's wrong, right? Like per Pangu, like decency, like, oh, a man and a woman after sunset is not decent. But they're like, hey, we've done... This seems to be their reasoning for everything. It's like, hey, we've done worse things, so what's one more? And so despite the initial hesitation, Anthony shares the bed with her. And they keep as much a distance as they can for Jesus Christ until they don't. At this point, I'm still going back and forth. Like, are all his nice gestures manipulations to get her on his side? Or is he like actually in love with her? Because again, like every once in a while, Ruini's like, oh, no way his tears are fake. And I'm like, but maybe they are. So again, up until this point, I'm a little bit like, is this girl just so bent for this guy that she invites him into bed? I don't know. Okay, so Ru Ying asks, like, did you just save me from the water because of my death magic that you needed? And Antony's just like, no, I was just scared that you're gonna die. And he says that he knows about the prophecy that the Sihai Emperor brought up earlier and hopes that she'll be the one to save either his or her world. He doesn't say both. Like in the past, he would say, I hope you'll save both our worlds. But in this point, he's like, I hope you'll save either of our worlds. And I'm a little bit like, So she asks, like, is it wrong of me to think that you're a good person and not the monster everyone says you are? And Antony like gets emotional and like holds her hand and says thank you. And Ru Ying says, yeah, thank you too for seeing me and being the first person to tell me that she deserves to be admired and not feared. No mention of Tao Hua, no mention of Mei Ya, no mention of Nai Nai, not even like Baihu a little bit, though, like whatever, but like no mention of her family. Tao Hua, who stood by her after the accidental death of their childhood friend, not Mei Ya, who like used her own body to protect her from when their father was abusive, and like not her grandma, who's like trying her best to find ways to keep her family safe, even if it means to get married to a man. And like, yeah, her grandma says, please don't use your death magic because the death magic costs you your life. All girl power is lost in the face of a handsome man with green eyes. Am I right, ladies? And again, Antony's like, own your power, girl. We can be gods above mortals. And she's like, I don't know, man. With every kill, like, I feel less human and I don't know what will be left. At this moment, Antony leans in to kiss her, calls her my love. Maybe one day I'll deserve you. He whispers that last part, so I don't really know if that was like meant to be heard by her on purpose. And like they finally go to sleep. She thinks to herself like, I have to kill these feelings because Antony Augustus is the enemy of my people, but maybe one day she'll learn to forgive and their two worlds can coexist. Again, I'm thinking like, is she Delulu because he made her Delulu, or is she really Delulu? But then Antony gets a POV chapter, and this is where I'm like, I really don't know what's going on here. So chapter 43 is Antony's POV chapter, and it's at this point here where I'm really just confused mostly. In his POV chapter, he's watching her sleep. Antony tells us that his grandfather believed love was a weakness, and he tried to follow that philosophy and, quote, used to laugh at the Romeo and Juliets of his world. So I was like, hold the phone there, because again, is Rome our world in an alternate history? Because if Romeo and Juliet exist in this world, that means Shakespeare exists in this world, but like Shakespeare existed in Elizabethan London. But if London is still in a place where the Roman Empire still exists, then it should still be Londonius when it was originally a Roman city before it became the British city that we know now. If this is the Roman Empire, can Shakespeare still exist in a Roman city? Does Caesar's play Julius Caesar exist? If we're talking about Julius Caesar, who was stabbed 23 times, but then his maternal nephew, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus, is the one who founded the Roman Empire because Julius Caesar was still in the time of the Roman Republic. Can Shakespeare still operate under these times? Like, is censorship really bad in Rome? Like, maybe it's not, but then, like, could he still write Julius Caesar? Because it talks about how the founder of Rome's uncle was stabbed 23 times because they thought he was gonna crown himself king of Rome. There's like the whole bunch of complicated Roman history. Anyway, so like that threw me off for like 20 minutes. So back in Antony's POV chapter, he's like, Ru Ying is in his heart now like a dragon around its hoard. Like now he knows why wars were fought for love. He would worship her and kneel for her until the world ended. But if she knew of his plans and what he's done and what he's going to do, then she wouldn't understand. She'll definitely hate him. And so he also has to stop these feelings for her because he can't bear his heart breaking and disappointing her. So like, it's in this chapter that we know from like, unless he's also super unreliable to us too, this is playing 4D chess. If the goal is to still paint Anthony as the manipulator, as the darkling type who wants to just like give in to Ru Ying's weaknesses to make her trust him and do what he says. Like, no, there's a whole like page and a half about how he used to think love was a weakness, but now Ru Ying came into his heart. I'm like, if the goal was to like have us think that Antony was the manipulator this whole time, this chapter like really throws an extra wrench in things, because that just makes me think this is actually supposed to be a romance. I'm still not sure, and he's so melodramatic. I'm like, okay. So this next chapter is chapter 44. It is my chapter. It is my double death chapter. I literally marked it because this chapter is a world building chapter about Pangu's creation myth. And I literally spent 2 hours open to this chapter trying to figure out how the rest of the world fits in with this creation myth. And so let me explain what happens. So the next day they're waiting for like Romans to find them, I guess. And Antony's like, hey, Ru Ying, like tell me a story about Pangu. So Ru Ying shares the story of the serpent goddess Nuwa. And Nuwa is also a real serpent lady creation goddess in Chinese mythology. But this book's version of Nuwa is mostly the same actually, but a little different than the real Chinese creation legend. So in this universe, speaking about the book's version of this, when the world was first made, Nuwa was lonely, so she created animals and people and breathed them to life. And she loved humans so much that she rushed the creation of some of them. Pause here. Up until this point, that is pretty much basically the same as the real Nuwa myth legend, where yeah, the world was lonely. She only created humans, crafted some of them, and then did a rush job on some of them. That's minor detail, but in this version, she took a stick and flicked mud onto the ground to create the rush job humans. In the real myth, she dragged a string through the mud to make the rush job humans. And this is used to explain why the noble class exists and the common people. So the noble class is like, oh, I am the crafted human touched by Nuwa's hand, and the commoners are just the rush job people. And yeah, in this version, that distinction is instead used to explain why xianglings exist and why non-magic users exist. Xianglings are the crafted people, non-magic users are the rush job people. I don't understand this switch between noble bloodlines in the original myth and then random magic in this one. It's not a very good one-to-one switch. It kind of throws everything off for me. But anyway, in this version, again, some people have magic, some people don't, but everybody loves Nuwa too much to care. Like, oh my god, like I love my snake mom. One day, However, the sky is torn open by battling dragons. Where the dragons came from, I don't know. In the original myth, it was two warring gods, in some versions. So, in this version, the world is flooded, and her humans are like, flooded. And she's like, oh God. So and Nua's like, oh man, like I gotta save my humans. So she gives up her blood, which solidifies into 5 rainbow stones. So she melts down those stones to patch up the sky, but this process is taking too long. So she ends up sacrificing her entire body instead. And what's left behind is the Wutai Mountain, where the people built monasteries to worship her and where monks can teach magic to younglings. And it was that way for thousands of years until the Romans came, and now they seized the temples, and now the monks are gone. I'm gonna keep talking about this version because I'm gonna go on and on about the real Chinese version. Antony asks her, hey, where are the 5 infinity stones? And Ru Ying is like, why is he asking this? So she's like, well, there are different versions of where the 5 rainbow stones went. Her grandma believes that one powerful magic stone was left behind, but the Wutai monks thought this was too dangerous, so they split it into 5 smaller pieces, and now these are now the infinity stones. It's said that each of the 5 fragments of the one stone was gifted to the 5 emperors of Pangu. And then Antony's like, well, I heard 20 years ago when the unequal treaty was signed, we were given 5 rainbow fragments, but I don't know if that's true. And she's like, yeah, we're obviously setting something up for later. So a lot of the Nuwa myth is directly taken from the real myths. Like, of course, there's various versions of the myth. Yeah, so the rush job thing is, so like the crafted versus rough job is used to explain noble bloodlines. And yes, in some versions of the real myth, she did create 5 rainbow stones to repair the sky. In other versions, she cut the legs off a couple animals to repair the sky. But anyway, that doesn't lend well to this. But the self-sacrifice part, like, to my research, not part of the real myth, but in my research, she does sacrifice herself in a 2014 Hong Kong movie called The Monkey King starring Donnie Yen, but not as part of the creation myth story. So that kind of breaks my brain a little bit, because like, why lift up the real Nuwa myth wholesale and change some things? They're not really like equivalent changes, you know what I mean? So this next part I'm gonna read after Ru Ying tells the Nuwa story is the part that kind of broke my brain. I literally like had this page open for like 2 hours, okay? So Ru Ying is like, I love the story of Nuwa. It's such an inspiration. Quote, I've always loved Nuwa for what she represents. She was a serpent deity, and serpents are often associated with evil and danger. I sometimes wonder if Nuwa was shunned by the other gods for her serpent body, hence her loneliness and her love for humans who worshipped her instead of fearing her. Those born with evil don't always have to be evil. Those born to destroy don't always have to destroy. Nuwa escaped her destiny of becoming a demon, so it gave me hope that Antony, that you might one day escape your own powers. Antony watched me for a moment, as if contemplating what to say next, and then blah blah blah. But it's that one passage that kind of just broke my brain for like 2 hours. Okay, so she says here, she was a serpent deity, and serpents are so often associated with evil and danger. I sometimes wonder if Nuwa was shunned by the other gods for her serpent body. Why snake bad though? This has become such a contentious point for me that I had to create my own little slip of paper for it. So, my question, why snakes bad? So in real Chinese culture, snakes are featured in a ton of stories like Legend of the White Snake, featured as an animal of the Chinese zodiac, considered like a little dragon. And again, Nuwa is a real Chinese creation figure, pretty much did the same thing except for the self-sacrifice and the switch from noble bloodlines to random magic. I keep going back and forth into the book, right? Nuwa created animals. So why snakes bad? And again, Ru Ying wonders if Nuwa was shunned for her serpent body by the other Pangu gods. And I'm saying, okay, but serpents should not have existed yet because Nuwa created animals. In the real creation myth, it was Pangu who created the earth and the animals, and then it was Nuwa who created humans. And like never once, like in my research, was there ever like oh, Nuwa was lonely because she was discriminated against for being a serpent lady. Also, Nuwa is always paired up with Fuxi, and they're like brother-sister marriage, because like they're representative of the yin yang, they're representative of like equal balance of marriage, like all these things. So like removing Fuxi, I don't get it, but like back to what Ru Ying is saying, she can't have been shunned for being a serpent because serpents did not exist yet. Okay, but like let's see what Ru Ying is trying to do here, okay? Like she wants to make her point that those who are born evil don't have to be evil. Okay, again, why snake bad? Okay, so let's say Nuwa was shunned by the other gods for just being like fugly. Like, oh my god, you have scales and you have like a tail. Like, girl, you're so fugly, like forget about you. Again, like we get no details about any other god, okay? None. Only the named one is Nuwa, okay? So she's like, oh man, like I'm weird and scaly, like I'm so lonely, man, like oh, but like I'll create humans and I'll create animals. Again, they say animals in the book, okay? And this could have been solved if like the animals were given to someone else before this, but they don't mention Pangu the god. Pangu is the name of the land here. Okay, so Nuwa creates animals, presumably snakes, and Nuwa creates humans. All humans love Nuwa. They're snake lady, so they should be like, yeah, we love snakes. Because our mom is a snake. A snom, if you will. And then moving on to like, she sacrifices her body to repair the sky. And so they establish the Wutai temples on Wutai Mountain to worship her and teach younglings how to use magic. These temples were still operating at the time of the Roman invasion, which means, presumably, they also still operated at the time of the Qin Emperor. Did at some point, like during the Qin Emperor's reign, or like at any other point, did they stop worshipping Nuwa? We're not told that. So that means Nuwa is and should be a common creation myth that's kind of accepted by everybody. Ru Ying never says like, oh, this myth is like has been lost to time, but my grandma told it to me. She doesn't say that, so why snake bad? And then if, let's say, the Pangu gods still didn't like Nuwa after she created humans, then why would they descend into mortal bodies to help the humans overthrow the Qin Emperor, not the real god? This is one line and it throws me off, okay? Because world building, like you can't, like I don't believe that you can just say anything when it comes to a fantasy world, okay? Everything you build in this fantasy world, like I'm using you generally, okay? When building a fantasy world, like everything has to come from some place. Everything just has to connect, or else the reader will point it out. It's a common like fantasy world building issue. If you have an obsidian blade in a world with no volcanoes, then where did the obsidian blade come from? Why snake bad? So I'm still trying to question this here. I'm still trying to figure this out. Okay, maybe the Qin Emperor stopped the worship of Nuwa because like, oh, since Nuwa handcrafted xianglings, and presumably we're not told whether or not the Qin Emperor was a xiangling himself, but since he terrorized them, reasonably he wasn't a magic user. So was he jealous of xianglings? Did he stop the worship of Nuwa? Did he turn snakes into bad symbols somehow, and like somehow because of that shift people stopped worshiping her? But like again, the Wutai temples predate the Qin Emperor because they've been around since the time of their creation, since the time of humanity, since the time of humanity's birth. So like did at some point like the Qin Emperor like destroy the Wutai temples? But no, like even if he destroyed them, they bounce back at the time of the Roman invasion 20 years ago. So why snake bad? And again, with xiangling abilities being called gifts, it's a positive connotation. I can't think of any connective thread. I'm trying to explore all my avenues here. This is like one line on page 298. Why snake bad? You know why snake bad? Because of Christianity and Lucifer tempting Eve to eat the fruit of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. Why snake bad? In this Chinese inspired fantasy world. I mean, yeah, there's been like evil snakes, but then overall, you have the zodiac sign and the real Nuwa creation and like the heavenly animals and stuff like that. I've like tried to deep dive into this as much as I could, but like generally Asian mythology, snakes are pretty neat. Why snake bad? And again, Ru Ying says, Nuwa is an inspirational story to me because those who are born evil don't have to be evil. We are not told the circumstances of Nuwa's birth. As far as my research goes in searching the real Nuwa, there's been like no indication that she was supposed to be the evil one, but she's like supposed to be the balance between herself and Fuxi, so like I don't really get it. Is she like a Mewtwo type birth situation? We only know that she created humans and sacrificed herself from them. And also, I want to point out, she mentions this story this far into the books. All of this has happened, and yet it's only now that Ru Ying says, oh, Nuwa is such an inspirational story to her, that those who are born evil don't have to be. But like also in chapter 1, she's like harboring some like dark thoughts where she's like, I'm gonna kill all these Roman invaders, which is kind of like not an evil thing to do per se, because the Romans are terrorizing her people, and like the one person she killed like before she was an assassin was like an accident. Like maybe if she killed her own father, that could be like something, but no, he died from opium withdrawal. That still does not answer the question, why snake bad? Okay, so finally moving on with the story. Antony wonders, what if Nuwa made Rome? Would she still love them despite the greed and pollution? And Ru Ying says, yes. She says Nuwa loves all her children. And I'm again thinking of Christianity a little bit, but like Auntie's like, nah, she wouldn't love us. And like my greatest fear is becoming like my grandfather, who abused him and Valentin whenever they disappointed him and wanted to raise them to be cruel and heartless. But then Ru Ying is like, you don't have to be like him. Randomly he's like, can I ask you a question? She's like, sure. And he asks her, why is it harder for you to kill people with your death magic than other people? Right, because as we learned earlier, when she like pulls the string that binds souls to bodies, like the string of tea, then like some of them are like resisting her, right? So like this is kind of like just a really weird flow of conversation, so I'm just gonna read it. This is on page 299. So he asks, why are some souls harder for you to harvest than others? I smiled. I don't harvest souls. I pull the tea that exists all around us and is what anchors our souls to our mortal bodies. I think, at least. They don't exactly teach us these kinds of things in schools. Why not? Because every form of magic is different. Because it is impossible to understand magic, as there are so many variations of the same powers. Because magic is rare. She said random before, okay? And above all, because magic is dangerous. It is a curse that haunts us. A demon we must resist always. So he says, that's a lie. The royal family is no more than they let on. If they weren't so scared of their own people's potential and trained xianglings like you from the moment you discovered your gifts, helped you ascend to your highest possibilities instead of just learning how to tame and control your powers like something that needs to be suppressed. Very natural dialogue here. Maybe Arlang would have stood a chance in a war. Progress is difficult to make when humans are too busy drowning in the fears of their own potentials. Your kind could have, should have, lived like gods. Rome should have been the one to kneel. Now look at us. Look at you, terrified of your own blessings, of your own shadow. I frowned. What are you talking about? Antony shook his head. Nothing, please continue. Why are some tea harder to pull than others? And then she talks about, oh, my theory is that it's their resolve to live that makes it hard to pull. As I said before in my earlier rant about the magic system, you'd think that for magic being around as long as humanity itself, they would have figured some things out, okay? Because she keeps talking about the baseline rules, like the standard rules that like they have the urge to use their magic and their tea is always the cost. And then it's so like bizarre to me where she's like, yeah, they didn't teach us this in schools. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because they seized the magic temples where they taught people. And like, if for some reason Antony doesn't know this, we know this because Ruyi knows this. Does she mean like regular school? But then again, and like, if magic has been around for as long as the humanity, then even in regular school, you'd think they teach like, hey, look, like magic users have these rules. But she says, no, magic is impossible to understand because it's so inconsistent. I'm gonna bring up My Hero Academia again. The quirk power system has been around for 100 years, and they've managed to figure it out enough to like establish schools and a registration system, a pro-hero career path. And in X-Men, we're like, I don't know much about the comics, but like coming in with movie knowledge, that's me. You know, like, yeah, mutants all have their random powers, but you know, everyone goes to Professor Xavier's school, you know, to help him out. And then Antony's like, no, like that's a lie used to, like everything that she says that's like negative, he's like, no, that's a lie used to control you. But then I'm like, who's right here? Because everything we learn is from Ruyi's perspective. Of course, being stuck in her limited perspective, we don't know what's true. And he says, no, that's a lie. And then she's like, oh, maybe it is. And I'm like, okay, so is it a lie or is it not? And like he says, like, if the royals like didn't suppress your potential, then you could have had a chance against Rome. And then again, it's like in the original Nuwa story, the crafted people were the noble bloodlines. So now we're swapping that with randomized magic. So then let's say, then the people of magic should be in power by that logic, right? So like it's a randomized magic inheritance power transfer based system. Then by that logic, Pangu should not be a monarchical patriarchy. It should be something maybe more similar to an Athenian democracy, perhaps? Because then where does the establishment of royal bloodlines come from if magic isn't a bloodline-based inheritance system? I recently watched a video by Overly Sarcastic Productions about the Athenian democracy origins, so my knowledge is very rudimentary, but it's basically like the way that they first started democracy was that like everybody gets a chance to like be in office for a little bit and then your term is done and you can go. So like if, let's say, magic equates to the right to rule based on the changes made to the Nuwa creation myth, then the Tin Emperor, if he wasn't a youngling, should not have been in power in the first place because he doesn't have magic and he was terrorizing younglings because the younglings are the crafted people. Again, as I'm saying by this logic, then there should never be a nobility class. There should only be a magic-based hierarchy. So if you have magic, you are automatically considered a higher class person, no matter what your bloodline is. I hope I'm not going crazy here. This is another why snakes bad question. So then Antony's pushing this like conspiracy theory that like, oh, this is a lie pushed by the royals to control you. And then I'm like, but that's so not smart of a society to do that. Because if younglings were feared, if they were all feared, no matter what kind of gift they have, a good gift or a bad gift, then it shouldn't it be in the best interest of the royal family to cultivate good gifts, to like keep them loyal, and to control bad gifts so because they fear them? But no, like we don't really know like how the Wu Tai temples really operated. Were they like control facilities, or were they like schools of magic to like, you know, like a positive degree? I think I'm just gonna turn into a vegetable thinking about all this. See, again, like that's a problem I have with this world building in particular, where they take real myths or like real names and just change one thing, but that throws everything off. Okay, yeah, like you can't, these don't connect. I'm gonna go nuts. Okay, so I have to move on, okay, because I've been here for way too long and my neighbors are playing music and I really hope like the mic doesn't pick it up. Okay, so moving on. Finally, this whole thing is interrupted because the ghosts come back and they found them and they surrounded the cottage that they're in, and like Ruyi knows the exact number there are because she has like her soul vision that can see the number of like human souls even through the walls, and she's like, I can't take all of them at once, and he's like, I believe in you. But she's like, okay, no, no, look, I have a plan. She goes out to the ghost with a knife pressed to his throat, and she's like, yeah, like, we knew you'd get it, girl. But no, like, that was a distraction so he can run away and she can fight the ghost to buy him time. But then Antony is like, no, 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 girl, like, you're coming with me, like, we can run away together. But she's like, no, like, your death will spark Roman war, like, you have to run away to safety. But then he says he'll start a war if she dies. And there's no time to consider his words before they're caught. Not by Gold Masks. I thought it was Gold Mask that came back, but turns out it was a guy named Red Mask. But he also has firepower, as Gold Mask did. Is this a plot hole, or is this like a weird choice that like maybe two people have the same kind of firepower? I just thought that was like a weird choice. So we have a Red Mask here who has fire magic, which traps Antony and Ru Ying as they're escaping. And Antony tells them taking him as a hostage for Pangu's freedom won't work. My grandfather's just gonna start a war. And Red Mask is saying, what I think he says is that they want to incite violence so that it shatters the Pangu's people's illusion that their royals have the power to protect them. Okay, so I hope that's what I mean. So I'm gonna read the quote directly from page 305. The Red Mask is telling Ru Ying, like, man, you're a traitor, you're a disgrace to your clan. And then Antony says, quote, there's nothing shameful about wanting to live. Antony spoke with that sultry, princely voice of his. And if you're here to take me as hostage, it won't work. My grandfather won't relinquish Pangu for me. He won't do it for anyone. If you take me, it will only inspire more violence, more bloodshed. Think carefully before your next move. Red Mask. Oh, that's precisely our plan, dear prince. We want war. We want bloodshed. We want your kidnapping to force your grandfather to drop his pretenses of peace. We want him to attack, shatter Pangu's fantasies of kind gods and treaties that hold the weight in face of greed. That's your plan? Use violence to unite all of Pangu's empires and the little dynasties calling themselves kingdoms because the great empires couldn't be bothered to wipe them out? Antony sneered, if your world were to witness the might of science, it would be everyone for themselves. No one would come to our lines or Silhai's rescue, I assure you. That must be what the Phantom is all about here. He is not just anti-foreign imperialist, he's also anti-royalist because the emperors have like done nothing after that one-day war to protect the people from like Rome's bullying and other crimes. And then that got me thinking, because from the author's note, we know that this was inspired by China's Century of Humiliation. China's Century of Humiliation ends roughly either with the establishment of the Republic of China, or it's considered to be the end with the establishment of the People's Republic of China. So if what I'm reading is correct, then this sounds an awful lot like the 1911 revolution, also known as the Xinhai Revolution, that led to the fall of the last Chinese dynasty, the Qing dynasty, because they were also mad at their dynasty for not doing anything to stop foreign imperialists. And this eventually led to the establishment of both the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China. I'm just gonna leave that there as food for thought, okay? So I just want to move on. So Antony's like, all right, I'll go with you willingly. I'll give up all of Rome's secrets if they let Ru Ying go. And they agree. I was like, okay, fine, we'll let the girl go. So Ru Ying is running away because she's like, yeah, there's too many of them. I'm gonna go find backup. And because I guess he's feeling so Shakespearean in this moment, Antony stabs Red Mask in the throat, killing him, and then he stabs himself. Haven't we established time and time again that Antony, oh, he really wants peace. We have to protect him at all costs because his death will incite Rome to start a war with Pangu. The very thing that he's trying to avoid. Because we're stuck in Ru Ying's brain, she doesn't know why Antony did this. He doesn't explain to her later why, because, well, spoiler alert, right after this, she's like crying over his dying corpse, and they get picked up by Roman soldiers and they're literally with a helicopter, airlifted away. And then even later, like, he doesn't tell her why he stabbed himself. She does wonder, like, it's like he can't bear to give up the secrets of Rome. He can't bear to be a prisoner. Like, we don't know why he did this. Like, he can't give up Rome's secrets, so he's stabs himself. Yeah, as I said, the Romans find them and they're taken to a helicopter, airlifted back to the city, and Antony's taken to a hospital. We are finally at the end of part 3, and there's a lot of things I can say now that we're at the end of part 3, but this is like the home stretch, so I'm just gonna keep going. So Ru Ying is like so distraught over Antony recovering in the hospital. She's begging death, like, don't take him, don't take him. And while she's recovering, Bai Hu visits Ru Ying in her like Roman accommodated apartment, and like she's angry at him because, oh, he's a phantom spy. He must be connected to Antony's assassination attempt and the Sihai Emperor's death. And I really tried to comb through like her words here. Like, is she so distraught that she forgot what actually happened, what the actual plan was? Because the narrative knows, oh, I should remove this because the red mask is dead. But the narrative knows that the Sihai Emperor's death was not part of the plan. He gave himself up like unprompted, willingly, to defend Antony. And also, I guess she forgot that Gold Mask said like, hey, the Phantom wants him alive, but got impatient, which is why we know Gold Mask is a woman. We know that she like attacked Antony because she got impatient, and then that accidentally led to the Sihai Emperor's death. And also when the ghosts like were surrounding him in the cottage, they still wanted to take Antony alive, and Antony stabbed himself for reasons unknown. So she's like, you must be connected to all this, and Bai Hu was like, no, like we wanted him alive, like we didn't want to, the Sihai Emperor was collateral damage. But then like Ru Ying, she really does sound like she is just like manipulated to like this insane degree. She stands firm that war must be avoided at all costs. Innocent people are gonna die if war starts. And once again, Bai Hu is like, Antony's like just as cruel as the rest of them. He's not a nice guy. And then again, he asks, do you even know about the laboratories where they take the younglings they kidnap? And she's like, what laboratory? And asks him to show her. Again, as I was reviewing this book, I kept going back and forth. Again, readers who read the author's note know about Unit 731. We know from the beginning that there are human experimentation labs by the colonizers. Ru Ying does not know, but she knew from the beginning that Tao Hua was investigating kidnapped Xianglings and blood-drained bodies. When she was kidnapped and taken to prison, she does not make that connection. But she also sees the glass arena where Xianglings showed their powers to the princes and were accepted or rejected. And she still doesn't make the connection that like, these must be where the kidnapped younglings go. This must be where the blood-drained bodies come from. And then even remember earlier when Bai Hu like first reveals to her that he's a phantom spy, he doesn't say laboratories in that moment because we have to prolong this conflict. But he says like, don't you know what happens to younglings who don't pass? And she says, I don't care. And yet we are like at the characters screaming at her like they're experimenting on them. We know the whole time. And yet Antony calls her so smart. So Bai Hu, because he's still masquerading as he's always been like operating under the disguise of Valentin's right-hand man. So he's like pretty high up there. So he manages to get both of them into the laboratories, and he shows her that this is where Princess Hele is kept, right? So remember back in the way right back beginning, we know that Rome has a royal hostage from Arlong named Princess Hele. And like, yeah, Ru Ying is like commenting here about how like, yeah, all women are expected to do is give up. Oh, sorry, I accidentally knocked over my plug. Okay, I thought my light bulb went out for a second. Okay, so yeah, Ru Ying is like the prisoner, Princess Hele. She's kept in a nice cell, of course, but she's like, nah, because she's a woman, she's expected to give up, to sacrifice for her brother and her father. Like, they demanded a royal hostage, and they're like, yeah, Princess Hele is a woman, she's expected to give herself up. That's just what she's thinking as she's seeing Princess Hele through like a security camera. And Princess Hele like looks at the camera as if she can see Ru Ying. So this is probably setting something up for later because they have to move on. Okay, so finally, Bai Hu takes her to where the experimentations are being done, and we see Tao Hua is on the verge of death after being experimented on for so long. So Ru Ying is rightfully horrified because she made Antony agree to release Taohua in the beginning when they first made their deal. And she reveals here that she never checked up on Taohua this whole time because she was too ashamed to like show her face in front of her because of what she had to do, blah blah blah, killing people and whatever. So of course Ru Ying is like, we gotta save Taohua, but then no, Bai Hu is like holding her back for her safety, and like, Ru Ying, this is the truth of what Antony does, don't turn your back on the truth. Countless younglings have been experimented on like Taohua. And he even reveals documents that reveals Antony ordered the raid on her neighborhood, and the documents have her name on it, so he ordered the raid on her neighborhood that involved sleep gas and bullets to specifically look for her and take other younglings. And so, finally, in front of Ru Ying's eyes, Taohua finally dies. I was so shocked. I was so legitimately shocked when this happened. Even though Taohua only showed up once, twice technically, I thought about her. I did not forget Taohua. I don't know, like, Taohua was fighting in the army to stop the rebellions, even though she was on the side of the Phantom. I don't know. This is the death that hit me pretty hard. So Ru Ying swears she'll make Rome pay, but she doesn't give an answer right away. When Bai Hu asks her to join them, she asks instead, like, what are they taking the blood for? Because when Taohua finally dies, the scientists drain all her blood. But Bai Hu says he doesn't know, but Ru Ying knows where to get the answers. We're really at the home stretch here. This poor library book, like, I'm so grateful to my library that they have this. I'll have to remove all of these tabs later. Okay, so distraction aside, Ru Ying is in Antony's hospital room where he's recovering, and he's really happy to see her. Valentin is there very briefly and like whispers something to him, and she's like, oh, they know. Because Bai Hu wasn't really trying to like sneak into the laboratory. He's like, yep, nope, I'm in the laboratory, she's in the laboratory. So they know that she was in the laboratory. And he admits that everything she saw was true, and he has tears in his eyes, and he's saying like, I never intended to deceive you. I was gonna tell you the truth eventually. I tried to keep my promise to free Taohua, but they already started experimenting on her. And Ru Ying is like, don't shift the blame. You're the Prince of Rome. They follow your orders. Why are you taking Xiangling blood? Honestly, his explanation is just kind of really like long. I really want to finish this, so I'm gonna try and relay it as best I can. So they're taking Xiangling blood because Roman scientists discovered that Pangu people have this special cell called a T cell. He specifically says he came up with the name T cell, and I'm like, wow. And so the scientists discovered that these T cells hold a lot of energy and are probably the source behind their magical abilities, right? So they harvest the T cells so that the energy can be used to solve the energy crisis in Rome, because remember, like, Rome is like, has all our climate change problems, plague, natural disasters, war, overconsumption, blah, blah, blah. So to solve the energy crisis, there's harvesting people. Antony says that his father found the portals, that the interdimensional portals that connected Rome and Pangu, and initially he was like, he just wanted to trade with them. He wanted to build factories and dispose garbage. Wow, okay, but like Pangu, like, hey, like, you don't have anything we want. So that's where the opium comes in. Antony says that opium was made specifically so that Xianglings can enhance their power. So what Ru Ying thought was a lie is probably true. That opium can enhance a Xiangling's power or even awaken dormant powers by stimulating cell growth. And from the way that he's wording it, it seems that they made opium before they found the existence of T cells. But how did you create the opium to stimulate the growth of T cells if you didn't know that magic was probably because of T cells. Also, how did you make the drug without testing it on xianglings first to see if they worked? Because, like, if this is the opium equivalent, then the British had the opium already. Also, in some research, I found out that China had a domestic opium market, but that's too much to think about. So yeah, like, opium wasn't something they already had. It was made specifically for xianglings to enhance their gifts, even though they didn't know about the existence of T cells yet. However, the unintended consequence was the addictive high and the eventual death. If they just continue using opium, they're gonna die anyway. So like, it's the death by what is basically an autoimmune response. What opium does is stimulate T cell growth. Then too many T cells will basically cause the body to attack itself. It's basically an autoimmune response, and the addictive high are like unintended side effects. But again, how did you know that the drug would enhance magic if you didn't test it first? And if you didn't test it first, then why? But you should have tested it first, then you would have known about the, like, how do the drug trials work in Rome? But they put the opium to market, and then Ru Ying is like, my father is dead from opium, my sister needs opium to live, and like, you have all these good intentions, so do something about it. And he's like, no, it's not that easy. His grandfather won't let him. He's trying to find a better solution, then harvested human cell energy for the Rome energy crisis. And like, I kept going back and forth here because I wasn't sure if the cells were actively being used in Rome to solve the energy crisis, or if it's like still in the early stages, but this is what it's gonna happen. I wasn't really sure. So Antony's like, no, like, I'm trying to find a better solution. Like, all of your assassinations was to like prolong the fragile peace so that he can find like a better solution than cheese cells to keep Rome alive. And she's like, how long will that take? Like, how many more deaths do I have? Are we going to be responsible for? Like, you're going to spend all this time trying to find a better solution. Like, she's finally on her last nerve. He keeps trying to say like, no, we're the same two people. We're doing bad things to try and do a good thing. We're not so different, you and I. And I really can't tell if this is like some villain monologue or something, but I'm just going to read a bit from page 342 right here. Like his last ditch effort, right? So he's like, I'm doing what I have to do, he said, just as you did when you pledged your allegiance to me to save your family. Pledge your allegiance, huh? So that's how you're thinking about that deal she made in prison. Anyway, so she says, it's not the same. It's exactly the same. We are the same. Whether you want to admit it or not, two people doing bad things for the right reasons. This is why we're here, pulled together by fate, because you and I were destined to be equals. Together we can right all of the wrongs that came before us. But to make new rules, we must be brave enough to break everything that came before us, and upon their ashes, we can build something new and better in its place. A benevolent ruler cannot save the world. Peace comes at the price of blood. Stand by me, and I promise I'll build you a better tomorrow for both of us. And so he keeps going. He's like my brothers, remember Valentin and the third brother Cassius, who doesn't show up at all? He's like, no, they just want to destroy, but we can rebuild. We can rebuild together. And Ru Ying thinks like, I could kill him now, but she knows that she shouldn't, because again, Antony's death will incite war with Rome, and like his grandfather will just keep doing the cell harvesting. So she's like, you know what? Like, in the words of my smart grandma, it's okay to lose the battle as long as you win the war. So Antony's like, Ru Ying, like come on, we can do this. Like, do you trust me? And she lies. Yes. Finally, we're at the last chapter. Ru Ying goes to Bai Hu, and he's like, I've been expecting you. And he's like, yeah, no, me too. I was so angry when I learned the truth, but I also decided to bide my time, pretend to be with the Romans. And she's like, why haven't the emperors done anything? And I'm a little bit like, girl, like, we've been saying this all throughout this book, that the emperors are scared of Rome's advanced technology. But anyway, she's like, why aren't the emperors doing anything? They're supposed to protect the people. They're the descendants of the gods. Bai Hu was like, nah, they're scared. And just because you're from a royal bloodline doesn't mean you're a good person. It's time to put their faith in something. Yeah. Finally, he's like, Ru Ying, will you join the Phantom's rebellion with me? And she says yes. Finally, we are at the end of book 1. I'm gonna pause here for the night because it's been like 5-6 hours of me filming and it's dark out and I don't know if you can hear my neighbor's music, but real quick, okay. So this gods thing. Remember my earlier point when I'm like, okay, if Nuwa crafted Xianglings and then did a rush job on everybody else, then per following the original myth, then wouldn't Xianglings be the rulers? And if magic is random, then wouldn't it not be a monarchical patriarchy? But then Ru Ying is like, but no, like emperors and are descendants of gods. So then we have these gods here. And did they end up making it a monarchy because they had descendants, and the descendants, no matter what, if they have magic or not, are always going to be the royal bloodlines here? Now that just puts these two at odds with each other a little bit. But then... then you have this guy named the Qin Emperor, not the real guy, and he was overthrown by the gods, and they helped the Xianglings overthrow the emperor. So then where did this emperor come from? If he was not already a descendant of the gods, and he was not a Xiangling, but then do they mean that after that overthrow, that these descendants after the Qin Emperor became the royal people? Okay, so my battery's dying for like the bajillionth time. I've exhausted all my resources. My stomach hurts. So I'm gonna film my final concluding thoughts tomorrow. Okay, so it is finally the next morning. Final thoughts. So coming back to the question, is To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods a colonizer romance? Technically, I don't know. Since the entire series hasn't come out yet, we only have this first book. Let me do it this way. Since we only have this first book, honestly, anything could happen with the next two because this is a planned trilogy. It is true that the second book title is already revealed, To Kill a Monstrous Prince. Even so, I'm like, well, that could be a literal death. That could be a symbolic, metaphorical death like what Zuko goes through in season 2 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. But then I kept thinking, was like, that could also mean Valentin. That could also mean Cassius, because there's a lot of different monstrous princes going on here. So I'm like, well, that title could honestly mean anything. Yeah, even though like the colonizer romance is a big point of contention with a lot of readers, I'm not sure, honestly, if this can even be considered a romance. Like, as I said earlier, I'm not sure what this is supposed to be. Is this supposed to be a story about a girl who's trying to survive in harsh times, in times of war, in times of oppression, and she's just doing anything she can to survive, even if it means doing bad things, even if it means being forced into a deal that comes at the cost of her own soul, of her own life, in exchange for protection for her family? Is it that kind of story, or is it like she sees this guy and this guy is also doing bad things for the sake of the greater good, and they're really similar, you know, in a way, and they understand each other in a way that nobody else understands them, and this world is so unfair, and like all the odds are against them, and like everything in their circumstances is driving them apart, their own plans are in the way of their relationship. Like, I'm not really sure. Because of my confusion on what this book is really trying to say, then it wasn't a very nice reading experience for me personally, which is why I ended up giving it 2 stars. Now, I didn't end up giving it 1 star. It just didn't feel right to give it 1 star because there are some good parts to it, because the narrative does know that what Ru Ying is doing is bad, that the ends don't justify the means. Bai Hu and Maya are like, girl, like, this isn't the way to do it. We want to fight for freedom. And they call out like Ru Ying for her questionable behavior. And then when she's talking to them, I'm thinking that like her language sounds as someone who's like really completely like possibly manipulated to be like delusional, you know, like the way that, for example, like mostly like women in abusive relationships with men are like, no, he's really a good guy, like you just don't understand him the way that I do. And I'm like, okay, are we portraying that like Ru Ying is stuck in this toxic relationship, or does she really see that this guy Anthony has hidden depths even though he's working for the enemy? I'm not sure, again, because another wrench that's thrown into this like process here is Anthony's POV chapter, where he talks about how like he really is in love with Ru Ying, and Ru Ying, he never intended to fall in love with Ru Ying. It wasn't meant to happen this way, but he never believed in love, but like now he would fight wars for her. I'm just not sure. I'm totally confused on what this book is trying to be. And also another thing, granted, for 2 stars, like I liked some of the action scenes. When we get to the more harrowing scenes, the more scary, awful scenes where like she's stuck in prison, and then there's the laboratory. Like honestly, I was like so scared and like feeling it emotionally in my gut and in my heart. I'm like, okay, like there are some good parts in here that make you feel what I think the narrative intends to make the reader feel. And so yeah, again, colonizer romance part aside, romance, I didn't really understand. And again, because I'm confused about what this book is, I'm not really sure how the characters are supposed to or trying to be. Because as I said in my earlier review, like it's totally understandable that someone can feel incredibly angry inside at the unfair world around them, but choose to take on survivalist choices. I would have liked to see more of this contradicting conflict within her, but like her way of thinking kind of either shifts or not and or, you know, where like, you know, like is she really delving in deep with her own inner conflict? I don't think so, because every time I read her, we're in her head, I'm just confused about what her thought process is. I don't really recall a moment where she's like aware of her own contradiction, aware of the contradictions of her feelings, aware of the contradiction between like her feelings and her actions. Maybe there's some part I missed. I don't know. I just didn't really feel it. And like, you know, if it was a consistent conflict, then I feel like I would have picked it up all throughout the book rather than just one part. I don't know. I keep thinking like, is there something I'm missing? Is there some piece of this that can make it all make sense? If there is, please let me know with page numbers. Because honestly, like I really want to figure it out, and I really want to like pinpoint exactly where. Romance aside, honestly, my biggest gripe is the world building. It borrows so much from real history and mythology, and that's not a bad thing to do. Like, hello, like the Percy Jackson series is a mythology fiction series based on Greek, Roman, all that stuff. Borrowing from mythology and being inspired from mythology isn't a bad thing. It's just that when this book does it, it doesn't take it as it is completely and put it in this book. It takes bits of it, puts it in this book, and then I'm looking at what's changed or what's not there, and I'm like, but that doesn't make sense. Like the whole thing with Nuwa, like is still throwing me off. Cause again, why snake bad if your mom is a snom and she created snakes because she created animals and she created humans, and humans love their snom mom. And then if the crafted humans are the magic people, but then wouldn't the magic people, if they're considered crafted, but then where do the emperors come from? Are they descendants of the gods? But then the gods descended to take down that evil emperor, so he might not have been a descendant of the gods, or maybe the gods changed their minds, but then he terrorized the magic people, so was he not a magic person? Or maybe he was a magic person, but then why did he terrorize the magic people? Maybe he was just an asshole. I don't know. So, and then again, the whole thing about the intersection between like gender and magic, but the magic being random. But then if it's random, then why is there a patriarchy? Because if like a woman has a really good ability, then shouldn't she be considered like of higher value than someone with a lesser like powerful ability? My arm hurts. Yeah, so there's just so many like seemingly throwaway lines that have way too many implications because of the changes made to a real world myth, real world legend. And if the change were a more equivalent exchange, if it wasn't random magic, it was magical bloodlines, that would make a little more sense maybe. But yeah, no, again, like mythology, there's just way too much going on, way too many elements from history and mythology. And because again, the author's note mentions Unit 731 and China's Century of Humiliation, I'm like, okay, well, like my perception of the book is going to be skewed before I even start. Because again, like from my research and my knowledge about Chinese history, specifically the Century of Humiliation, is that it ends with the establishment of the Republic of China and or the People's Republic of China. So then I'm reading what the Phantom is up to, and I'm like, is this gonna just be that. So this is like a what if story of what if we have magic, and it's just kind of implying the same as what happened in real history. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna stop. This first book, I'm not sure about the rest of the series. Like from what I can guess from everything that's been established in this book, if this is a romance, are they aiming for like a Zuko and Darkling type romance plotline? But those don't really work. I cannot see a way in those two guys can mesh very well. Honestly, my best case scenario is that Antony dies, or at the very least does not end up with Ru Ying if it's a romance. If it's not a romance, then I hope Antony dies. Like Mother Gothel or the Darkling or... Okay, so I really just gotta move on from this. I gotta remove all these tabs. Well, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you want to read this book, or if you have read this book, please let me know your thoughts. If there's anything I missed, please let me know in the comments. And if you liked me losing my sanity, or if you'd like to see more of these types, I actually had a lot of fun putting all these little pieces together. Can you even see it? No, my chair is blocking it. But I had a lot of fun like putting all these little pieces together. I guess you can subscribe if you want. I mean, you made it this far. I've lost so many brain cells. It's the least you can do. No kidding. But yeah, cause your fan and friends, good night. I'll see you in the next one, and goodbye.